There is a moment in Season 5 where a tall, gaunt man in a blue robe is standing inside the ruins of a collapsed grocery store, and he is singing the theme song to a television show called Cheers to a small girl with dark hair and grey skin, and the crown resting crooked on his head is, very slowly, in a way neither of them can see happening, erasing every memory he has of who she is. The store has no roof. The shelves are bare and bent. Somewhere outside, the things that used to be people are moving through a city that used to be New York. And the man keeps singing, because the singing is the only thing that keeps the girl calm, and keeping the girl calm is the only thing left that he understands about himself. He does not know that he is going mad. He does not know that the crown is the reason he is still alive, and also the reason he is being slowly hollowed out. He only knows that the small girl is afraid of the dark, and that he can hold the dark back for one more night if he keeps his voice steady. That scene is the seed of everything. Hold on to it, because we are going to come back to it, and when we do, it is going to mean something different than it does right now. For the next while, we are going to travel the entire length of a story that begins 1,000 years before that grocery store and ends 1,000 years after a song sung at the end of the world. We are going to walk through it slowly, the way you walk through a house you grew up in, recognizing every room. This is the entire story of Adventure Time, told from the beginning, and woven through it are the theories the show invited and then, deliberately, refused to close. Here is the thing about those theories, and it is the idea that will hold this entire journey together. Adventure Time is a show that grew, across 8 years and 10 seasons, by leaving its biggest questions open on purpose. The nature of GOLB, the reading that says the whole thing, might be a dying mind. The question of whether Mo can be trusted to tell us the truth. These are not loose threads the writers forgot to tie off. They are the breathing room of the story. They are the spaces the show left empty so that the world could keep being bigger than any single answer. The theories are not the plot holes. The theories are the part of the story that is still alive. Welcome to Tome. Get comfortable, because this one goes all the way back to the beginning and travels the full length of the road. Let us get into it. To understand the entire story, you have to start before the story. You have to start before Finn, before Jake, before the Candy Kingdom, before the crown ever touched anyone. You have to start with a war. The land of Ooo, the bright and strange and candy-colored world where almost everything in this show takes place, is not a fantasy world that has always existed. It is the Earth. Our Earth. It is the Earth roughly 1,000 years after a catastrophe the show calls the Mushroom War, a nuclear conflict that ended human civilization and left the surviving planet warped, mutated, magical, and almost entirely emptied of the people who used to live on it. This is not a fan theory. This is confirmed, stated, woven through the imagery of the entire series. The floating chunks of land, the bitten-out crater that forms one of the recognizable landmarks of Ooo, the ruined cars and rotting televisions and half-buried highways that the characters walk past without ever explaining. Ooo is post-apocalyptic Earth, and the show tells you this from very early on, and then it does something remarkable with the information. It does not dwell on it. It lets the children of this world grow up, without the weight of knowing what the ruins are. Think about what that actually means as a storytelling choice. The single largest fact about the world, the fact that recontextualizes every adventure, every silly quest, every candy-coated kingdom, is a fact that the main characters mostly do not carry. Finn does not walk through the world mourning a civilization he never knew. He walks through it as the only home he has ever had. The ruins are not a tragedy to him. They are the landscape. And the show trusts you, the viewer, to hold the knowledge the characters do not. You know what the Bitten Mountain is. You know what the rusted machines were. And every time the characters treat the wreckage of the old world as ordinary, the gap between what you know and what they know becomes the quiet engine of the whole series. That gap is the first thing Adventure Time leaves open. Not because it forgot to explain, because the not explaining is the point. The world feels deep precisely because so much of it goes unspoken. The Mushroom War is the foundation then, but it is a foundation that the show keeps mostly buried, and we will be digging down to it again and again as we go. For now, understand the shape of the timeline. The bombs fall. Civilization ends. The survivors scatter. Magic, which the show suggests was always present in some dormant form, surges back into a world that no longer has the science to suppress it. Creatures mutate. New peoples are born from the wreckage. And in the long aftermath, two figures begin a journey through the ruins that will turn out to be the emotional spine of the entire series. even though the show does not let us see it clearly until years into its run. Those two figures are the man in the blue robe and the little girl, and now we can look at them properly. The episode is called Simon and Marcy. It is Season 5, Episode 14. It aired in March of 2013, and it carries a particular weight in the history of the show because it was the last episode storyboarded by Rebecca Sugar before she left Adventure Time to create her own series. So this is, in a real sense, a goodbye letter folded inside a flashback. The man is Simon Petrikov. The girl is Marceline. And the episode shows us what they were to each other before either of them became the figures we know. Here is the story it tells. After the Mushroom War, in the ruins of a destroyed city, a young Marceline is alone and starving and surrounded by the mutated, dangerous remnants of the old world. Simon finds her. Simon is already wearing the crown, and the crown is already doing its work. It grants him a kind of power, a frost magic that lets him fight off the things that would hurt her, lets him keep her fed, lets him keep her warm. But every time he draws on the crown, it takes a little more of him. It scrambles his mind. It pulls him further from the man he used to be and closer to the raving, frozen figure he is going to become. And he knows this. That is the part that breaks you when you understand it. Simon knows the crown is destroying him, and he keeps putting it on anyway, because the alternative is letting the little girl freeze or starve or be eaten in the dark. The episode builds to a scene that you should let sit with you. Marceline is sick. Simon goes to find her medicine, the way a parent does, the way the only adult in a child's world does. And to do it, to survive the journey through the ruined city, he has to use the crown more than he ever has. By the time he comes back, he is barely Simon anymore. He is becoming the Ice King. And Marceline, frightened, asks him to sing the song again, the Cheers theme song, the one about a place where everybody knows your name, which is exactly the thing a war orphan and a man losing his name would cling to. And he sings it. His voice cracks. The crown has nearly won, and the show does not add swelling music to tell you how to feel. It just holds on the two of them, in the ruins, singing about belonging in a world that has lost almost everyone. This is not a sad backstory. This is the story. Think about what Adventure Time chose to make its emotional bedrock. Not a battle, not a prophecy. A man choosing, over and over, to sacrifice his own mind so that a child does not have to be alone. The behavioral read is everything here. Simon does not give a speech about love. He does not declare his devotion. He sings a sitcom theme song with a cracking voice while his identity dissolves. The show is telling you something about Simon that no monologue ever could. It is telling you that the most profound act of love in the entire series is a quiet one, performed by a man who will not even remember he performed it. There is a detail in this episode worth slowing all the way down for, because it is the kind of detail the show plants quietly and never underlines. When Simon uses the crown to protect Marceline, he is not transformed all at once. The change is gradual, a sliding, a loss measured in small increments, and the episode shows you the increments. His speech becomes stranger. His logic loosens. The warmth in his eyes flickers, and between the moments of slippage, he keeps trying to be normal for her, keeps trying to act like the adult she needs, keeps performing stability over a self that is dissolving underneath. He makes her a toy. He tells her things will be all right. He does the small, ordinary work of caretaking even as the extraordinary horror of his own erasure proceeds. The show does not dramatize the horror with music or with a villain's gloating. It dramatizes it with the ordinariness Simon keeps trying to maintain. And the ordinariness is what makes it unbearable. Let yourself sit, for a moment, inside the world this episode builds, because the texture of it is part of how it works on you. The light in Simon and Marcy is grey and low. The light of a city where the power has been off for 1,000 years, where the sun comes through broken windows and settles on dust. The sounds are small, wind moving through empty buildings, footsteps on broken glass, the distant wrong noises of the mutated things that move through the streets. And against all that vast emptiness, two small figures, a man and a child, moving carefully through the ruins, looking for food, looking for shelter, looking for one more safe place to spend one more night. There is no swelling score telling you this is important. There is just the quiet, and the cold, and the way the two of them stay close to each other, because staying close is the only warmth the world has left to offer. And the child does not understand what is happening to the man. That is part of what makes it bearable to watch, and unbearable to think about. Marceline, small and frightened and trusting, sees Simon get a little stranger each day. sees his jokes turn odd, sees him forget things, and she does not have the words for what she is witnessing, because no child does. To her, he is simply her protector, the grown-up who keeps the monsters away and finds her food and sings to her when she cannot sleep. She does not know she is watching a person disappear. She only knows that the singing helps, and that as long as the singing continues, the world is survivable. The show puts you in both positions at once. You see what Marceline cannot, the erasure proceeding in real time, and you also feel what she feels, the simple animal comfort of a voice in the dark. The doubleness is the whole experience. To watch this episode is to know the ending, and to want, anyway, for the song to go on a little longer. And think about what the show is asking you to understand through that ordinariness. Simon is not being punished. He has done nothing wrong. He is a kind man who found a cursed object and used it for the most defensible reason a person can have, to keep a child alive, and the cost is the slow theft of everything he is. There is no villain in Simon and Marcy. There is only a crown that gives and takes in the same motion, a world that left a man no good options, and a love that proceeds anyway, knowing the price, paying it willingly, one memory at a time. The show is establishing, at its emotional foundation, that the deepest tragedies in OO are not caused by malice. They are caused by the structure of a broken world that asks impossible prices of people who are only trying to take care of each other. The apocalypse did not just end civilization. It set the terms under which love would have to operate forever after, and under those terms, love is still chosen. That is the whole argument of the show, stated once, quietly, in a ruined grocery store, and never improved upon. And this is where the first great open question of the series lies, the one we will follow all the way to the end. The crown. What is it, exactly? Where does its magic come from? Why does it grant power and take memory in the same gesture, as though forgetting were the price of survival? The show gives us pieces. It tells us Simon found the crown as an antiquities dealer before the war, that wearing it kept him alive through the apocalypse, that it whispers to him in the voice of a being we will meet much later. But the full nature of the crown, the deepest mechanism of how it works and why it costs what it costs, the show keeps deliberately partial. It hands you enough to feel the tragedy completely, and not enough to file the case closed. That is the pattern. Remember it. The show will do this again and again on a larger and larger scale, until the final question it leaves open is the size of the universe itself. The show actually began revealing Simon's tragedy earlier than most viewers noticed, and the way it did so is a masterclass in patient planting. In Holly Jolly Secrets, Season 3, Episode 19, Finn and Jake find a collection of the Ice King's private videotapes and watch them, expecting embarrassing secrets to mock. And what they find instead, buried among the silliness, are recordings from before, from when the Ice King was a man named Simon. Footage of a normal person slowly becoming aware that something is wrong with him, that the crown is changing him, that he is losing his grip on who he is. The episode frames it, at first almost as comedy, Finn and Jake snickering through someone's home videos, and then the tone curdles, quietly, as the truth of what they are watching becomes clear. The show let you laugh at the Ice King for 2.5 seasons before it began, gently, in the middle of a Christmas episode, to show you what he had lost. It did not announce the tragedy. It hid it inside a comedy premise, the way it hides the apocalypse inside a candy world, and it trusted that the dawning horror would land harder for having been smuggled in under a joke. This is the show training you, once again, to distrust the surface, to understand that the laughable figure is carrying an unspeakable grief, that the comedy and the tragedy are the same thing viewed from different distances. And it left the full story of Simon open here, a glimpse, a fragment, a set of tapes that raise more questions than they answer, so that when I Remember You arrives a season later, the ground has already been prepared. The show plays the long game even with its saddest material. It would rather you discover the tragedy slowly, over years, than have it explained to you all at once. To feel the full shape of what the crown does, you have to jump forward in the timeline of Simon's life, to the version of him we actually met first, before we ever knew his name was Simon. The episode is I Remember You. It is Season 4, Episode 25. It aired in October of 2012. By the time of this episode, Simon is gone. What is left is the Ice King, a figure the show had spent years presenting as comic relief, a buffoonish villain who kidnaps princesses and lives alone in a frozen mountain and talks to penguins. The joke of the Ice King was always that he was pathetic. And then this episode arrives, and quietly informs you that the joke was a tragedy the whole time, and that you laughed at a man who lost his entire self. The story of the episode is simple and devastating. The Ice King comes to Marceline for help writing a song. He does not remember her. He does not remember that he raised her. He does not remember the grocery store, or the Cheers song, or any of it. And Marceline, who remembers everything, has to sit across from the man who was once the only person who took care of her, and watch him fail to recognize her. They find an old photograph. They find old tapes Simon recorded as he was losing himself, in which he apologizes, in advance, for the things he was going to become, for the burden he was going to put on her, for forgetting her. And the song they end up performing together is built from those apologies. The words of the man Simon was, sung by the man he is now, who does not understand what he is singing. Sit with that for a moment. The Ice King performs his own goodbye, and does not know it is a goodbye. He reads the words of the father he used to be, and feels nothing in particular, because the part of him that could feel them is the exact part the crown erased. And Marceline feels all of it, because she is the one who was left holding the memory. The show frames this as a duet, but it is not a duet. It is one person grieving, and one person who can no longer attend his own funeral. The gap between what the song says and what the singer understands is the entire emotional architecture of the scene, and the show does not close that gap for you. It does not give the Ice King a sudden moment of clarity. It lets him stay lost. That refusal is the cruelty and the honesty of it. There is a smaller detail in I Remember You that carries the whole tragedy in a single object, and it is the kind of thing the show trusts you to find on your own. The tapes. Simon, in the years when he could still feel himself slipping, recorded messages, knowing he would not remember making them, knowing the person who would eventually hear them would be a Marceline he could no longer recognize. He wrote his apology in advance, addressed to a future he would not be present for. And those recordings are the only way the man Simon was can still speak to the girl he raised, because the man who exists now, the Ice King, is incapable of saying any of it. The love had to be put into storage. It had to be recorded and left behind, like a letter from the dead, because the living version of the person could no longer deliver it. Think about what that means. Simon loved Marceline so completely that he prepared his goodbye while he could still feel the love, so that something of it would survive the erasure of the self that felt it. And the show never resolves the cruelty of that arrangement, never lets the Ice King fully become Simon again in this episode, never grants the easy reunion the moment seems to beg for. It leaves the gap open. Marceline gets the words, but not the man. She gets the apology, but not the person who is sorry. And that withholding, that refusal to collapse the tragedy into a comforting reunion, is the show keeping faith with the truth of what the crown did. Some wounds do not close. Some losses are permanent. And the show is willing, even in a children's cartoon, to let a loss be permanent. To let a song be a goodbye to a person who is standing right there and cannot be reached. The open wound is not a failure of the story. It is the story refusing to lie to you about what loss is. What I want you to notice as we move through these early pieces is that the show is teaching you how to watch it. It is teaching you that the surface and the depth do not match, and that the mismatch is where the meaning lives. The Ice King is funny on the surface and a tragedy underneath. Ooh is a candy paradise on the surface and a graveyard underneath. And the theories that fans built around this show, the readings the show never confirmed and never denied, are the audience learning the lesson the show taught. Adventure Time trained its viewers to look for the deeper layer, and then it left certain layers permanently in shadow, so that the looking would never have to stop. The mysteries are not failures of explanation. They are the show keeping faith with the way it taught you to watch. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now we can begin the story as most people first encountered it. Not in the ruins, not in the flashbacks, but in the present day of Ooh, with a boy and a dog. The first proper episode of the series is Slumber Party Panic, Season 1, Episode 1. It aired in April of 2010. And what is striking about it, watching it now with the whole story behind you, is how completely it withholds the apocalypse. There is no mention of the Mushroom War. There is no grief. There is a candy kingdom, and a princess made of bubblegum, and zombies made of candy, and a boy hero named Finn, and his best friend Jake, a dog who can stretch and reshape his body to any size. The tone is bright and chaotic and fun. The world is presented as a playground. And that withholding is itself a choice you should respect. The show could have opened with the war. It could have started with exposition, with a grim narrator explaining the fallen world. Instead, it started with a slumber party and candy zombies, and trusted that the darkness underneath would seep up through the cracks over time. The way it does in life. The way a child slowly learns what the adults around them have been carrying. Finn and Jake live in a tree fort, built into the hollow trunk of an enormous tree, surrounded by the wreckage of a world that ended 1,000 years before they were born, and they do not think about it, because to them it is simply the place where they live. The show begins inside their unknowing, and asks you to begin there too. If you want to feel the particular texture of those earliest days, the days before the show knew how deep it was going to go, you can sit inside an episode like Prisoners of Love, Season 1, Episode 3. It aired in April of 2010, in that very first run, and on its surface, it is the simplest possible thing. The Ice King has captured a group of princesses and locked them in an icy dungeon, and Finn and Jake are imprisoned alongside them, and the whole episode is the small, cheerful problem of how to escape. There is no apocalypse in it. There is no tragedy you can see. There is a frozen jail and a lonely king, and a boy who wants to set everyone free. And the pleasure of it is the pleasure of watching competence and friendship solve a problem that is exactly the right size to be solved. And yet, watched from the far end of the whole story, even this tiny episode is quietly carrying the show's deepest material, and the carrying is so gentle, you almost miss it. The Ice King kidnaps princesses because he is lonely, because the crown took everyone who ever loved him, and left him with a need for company that he no longer has the mind to pursue in any way that works. The episode treats this as a joke, as the premise of a romp, and it is a joke, but it is the same man from the grocery store, the same crown, the same erasure, played here entirely for laughs, because the show has not yet told you what you are looking at. This is the texture I want you to feel as we move through the early seasons. The whole tragedy is already present, fully formed, sitting inside the comedy, waiting. The show is not hiding it from you exactly. It is letting you live, for a little while, in the same unknowing the characters live in, so that when the knowing comes, it will arrive as a deepening of something you already loved, rather than as new information. The early adventures also establish the moral simplicity that the show will spend 10 seasons complicating, and an episode like City of Thieves, Season 1, Episode 13, is a clean, small example of it. Finn and Jake enter a city where everyone is a thief, a place built entirely on taking, and Finn, the pure-hearted hero, refuses to steal even when stealing seems like the only way through. The episode plays with his certainty, tests it, and the comedy comes from how absolute his goodness is, how unwilling he is to bend it even slightly. It is the show drawing its hero in his earliest, cleanest form, a boy whose virtue is uncomplicated, whose sense of right and wrong has not yet been tested by anything that would make it hard. And the reason this matters to the whole story is that this clean, simple Finn is exactly the Finn the show is going to spend years dismantling, lovingly, on purpose. The boy who would not steal in Season 1 is the same boy who, seasons later, will manipulate the people he loves, will hurt the Flame Princess, will meet a father who does not want him, will lose an arm and a certainty along with it. The show begins with a hero whose goodness is effortless because he has never been hurt enough to make it hard. And then it spends its entire run putting him through the kind of damage that turns effortless goodness into chosen goodness, which is the only kind that actually counts. You have to see the simple Finn first to understand the cost of the complicated one. The early adventures are not just nostalgia, they are the baseline against which all the later wounds will be measured. Early in that first season, the show plants a seed it will not pay off for years, and this is the first sign that Adventure Time was playing a longer game than its goofy surface suggested. The episode is The Enchiridion, Season 1, Episode 5. Finn and Jake are sent to retrieve an ancient book, The Enchiridion, a guide for heroes. On the surface, it is a quest episode, a series of silly trials, a fun romp. But the Enchiridion itself is real, and it matters, and the book will turn out to be connected to the deepest mechanics of the show's cosmology, to the multiverse, to the beings that sit above the world. The show drops a sacred object into Episode 5 of Season 1 as though it were a toy, and then waits, patiently, for years before revealing what it actually is. The early seasons are full of small episodes that look like filler and turn out, in retrospect, to be the show quietly teaching its own grammar. Take Dungeon, Season 1, Episode 18. On the surface, it is a simple premise. Finn and Jake enter a dungeon, each wanting to prove they can handle its trials alone, and each fails at the kind of challenge the other would have passed easily. Finn cannot solve the puzzles that require Jake's particular cleverness. Jake cannot muster the courage that comes naturally to Finn. They are humbled, separately, and only together do they have a chance. It is a lesson episode, light and quick. But notice what it is actually establishing, because the show will build its entire emotional architecture on it. Finn and Jake are not complete on their own. Each is missing exactly what the other has. The dungeon is a machine for revealing their interdependence, and the show returns to that interdependence across 10 seasons, deepening it, testing it, eventually threatening it. The friendship between the boy and the dog is not decoration on top of an adventure show. It is the adventure. It is the thing every dungeon, every quest, every cosmic threat is secretly about, where the two beings who need each other will keep choosing each other. The show planted that in episode 18 of season 1, in a throwaway dungeon, and it never stopped paying it off. By the finale, the question of whether Finn and Jake can keep being what they are to each other as Finn grows up and the world changes carries the weight of everything the dungeon first suggested. Nothing in this show is filler. The filler was always foundation. This is the accumulation that defines the series. Every season, the show plants more than it pays off, and pays off more than you remembered it planting. Watching Adventure Time from the beginning is an experience of constant retroactive deepening. A throwaway joke in season 1 becomes a load-bearing pillar in season 6. A background detail becomes a revelation. The waving snail hidden in the corner of nearly every episode turns out to be a vessel for the show's greatest villain. Nothing is wasted, and almost nothing is explained at the moment it appears. The show asks for your patience and rewards it, and the reward is always the same shape. The thing you walked past was load-bearing all along. And here is the first place where a beloved theory takes root, the one that some viewers carry through the entire series like a splinter: the dream logic. From very early, Adventure Time loves to drop Finn into dreams, alternate worlds, pocket realities, and pillow dimensions. The show is so comfortable bending its own reality that a certain kind of viewer began to wonder whether any of it was real at all, whether the entire candy-colored world might be the interior of a single mind. We are going to follow that thread carefully when we reach the episodes that feed it most directly, and I am going to be honest with you about what it is and what it is not, because the audience for this show fact-checks hard and deserves the truth. But I want you to notice that the show invites the question this early. It builds a world flexible enough to make you doubt its solidity, and that flexibility is not a flaw. It is the same breathing room. It is the show leaving the floor a little uncertain so that wonder has somewhere to live. Even in that first season, the darkness underneath the candy surface begins to show itself, and it shows itself in a way that connects directly to the buried apocalypse. The episode is Ocean of Fear, Season 1, Episode 16. In it, the show reveals that Finn, the fearless hero, the boy who charges into dungeons and fights monsters without hesitation, is terrified of the ocean. Thalassophobia, the fear of the sea, and the episode treats it not as a quirk, but as something deep and instinctive and unexplained. Finn cannot go near the water. The sight of the open ocean reduces him to panic, and the show, in its early goofy register, does not tell you why. But once you know what ooh is, the fear of the ocean reads differently, and this is the show teaching you, very early, to find the apocalypse buried in the texture of ordinary moments. The ocean rose when the world ended. The sea swallowed cities. For a being native to a post-apocalyptic Earth, an instinctive terror of the water that drowned the old world is not a random phobia. It is a kind of inherited memory, a fear that lives in the body before it lives in the mind. The show never states this. It never connects Finn's thalassophobia to the mushroom war out loud. It simply plants the fear in Season 1 and lets it resonate, years later, against everything you learn about the flooded, ended world. The connection is left open. You make it yourself. And because you make it yourself, it feels truer than if the show had handed it to you. Across the first season, what the show is really doing, underneath the quests and the candy zombies, is establishing relationships. The friendship between Finn and Jake is the center of gravity, and an early episode like My Two Favorite People, Season 1, Episode 9, spends its time on something as small as jealousy between friends, on the fear of being replaced in someone's affection. The show, even at its silliest, keeps returning to attachment. Who loves whom? Who is afraid of losing whom? Who takes care of whom? These are the questions Simon and Marceline were always living inside, And now they are the questions Finn and Jake live inside, and the continuity between those two pairs, the orphan and the guardian, is the show quietly rhyming with itself across 1,000 years. Even the smallest, earliest episodes are quietly building this idea of care as the organizing principle of OO. In Memories of Boom Boom Mountain, Season 1, Episode 10, Finn spends the episode compulsively helping everyone who asks, unable to refuse anyone in need, running himself rag, trying to solve every problem in the land. On the surface, it is a simple lesson episode about not overextending yourself. Underneath, it is the show establishing the central trait of its hero. Finn is, at his core, a being who cannot walk past suffering. The orphan raised by a dog and a dog's parents has become a boy whose entire identity is the impulse to take care of others. And the episode shows you that this impulse is so strong, it nearly breaks him. And that is not an accident of characterization. It is the show's thesis growing in its hero from the very first season. Finn was found and cared for when he was a helpless baby, abandoned and crying in the wilderness, taken in by Jake's family and raised as their own. He is alive because someone agreed to keep watch over him when he could not keep watch over himself. And so the deepest thing in him, deeper than his courage, deeper than his love of adventure, is the need to pass that care forward, to be for others what someone once was for him. The relay of caretakers is not just a structure the show imposes on its timeline. It is a thing that lives inside its protagonist, planted in Episode 10 of Season 1 and paid off 1,000 years later when the watch passes to Shermie and Beth. Finn helps because he was helped. That is the whole inheritance. That is the thing the apocalypse could not destroy, and the thing every generation of OO agrees to carry. Because that is the deeper structure underneath the timeline. Adventure Time is a story about who agrees to take care of whom in a broken world. Simon takes care of Marceline. Marceline, much later, will take care of Simon in her own way. Jake takes care of Finn. Finn eventually will have to learn to take care of himself, and then others. Princess Bubblegum takes care of an entire kingdom of beings she made with her own hands. The apocalypse stripped this world of almost everything. And what grew back, what the show is most interested in, is the practice of guardianship. Every era hands the watch to the next. And the open questions, the things the show refuses to resolve, are often questions about whether that care was enough, whether it could ever be enough, in a world this damaged. The show does not answer. It just shows you the caring, and lets the question breathe. The question of Finn's humanity, the loneliness of being the last of your kind, surfaces early and is left to ache for years before any answer comes. The episode is Susan Strong, Season 2, Episode 18. Finn, who has always been told and always believed he is the only human in OO, encounters a group of creatures living underground who might be humans, or might be mutated descendants of humans, and among them is a large, powerful figure he names Susan Strong. Finn is overwhelmed by the possibility that he is not alone, that there are others like him, that the species he thought had vanished might still exist somewhere in the world. The hope is enormous, and the show treats it tenderly. And then the show declines to confirm it. Whether Susan is human, whether the underground creatures are truly Finn's people, is left deliberately ambiguous for a very long time. The answer deferred season after season until the Islands miniseries finally addresses it. The show let Finn, and you, sit inside the not knowing of whether he was truly alone in the world, because the not knowing is the more honest emotional state for a last survivor. Hope without confirmation. The possibility of others, never quite verified. The show understood that the loneliness of being last is not a fact to be resolved, but a condition to be lived inside. And it made you live inside it alongside Finn for years, before it offered any relief. The mystery of the humans was not a plot thread the show was slow to address. It was a feeling the show wanted you to carry, the specific ache of maybe not being alone, held open on purpose. As the seasons go on, the relationships deepen and complicate, and one of them becomes the subject of years of fan attention and eventual canonical confirmation. The relationship between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum. An episode like What Was Missing, Season 3, Episode 10, is where the fandom first really felt it. The charged history between these two characters. The sense that they had been something to each other, and that it had ended badly. The show, at this point, did not state anything outright. It left a door open. It let the tension between Marceline and Bubblegum hum under the surface of an episode that was ostensibly about a door that opens only for the most precious thing you own. The history between them gets one of its most telling expressions in Sky Witch, Season 5, Episode 29. an episode where Marceline and Bubblegum have to work together to recover a stolen object. And the object that matters most, the one the episode quietly centers on, is a worn old stuffed bear named Hambo, Marceline's most treasured possession. A gift from Simon in her childhood, the single object that connects her present self to the little girl in the grocery store. The episode reveals that Bubblegum has Hambo, that she had acquired it, that she gives it back, and the gesture carries an enormous freight of unspoken history between the two of them. They do not say what they were to each other. They do not need to. The bear says it. And this is the show working in its preferred register, the register of the unspoken, the register where the deepest things are conveyed by objects and behavior rather than declaration. The whole charged history of Marceline and Bubblegum, the affection and the hurt and the distance, is compressed into the handing over of a stuffed animal, and the show trusts you to feel the weight without spelling it out. The withholding is not coyness, it is craft. The relationship means more for being unstated, because an unstated thing is something you lean toward, something you complete with your own understanding, something that lives in you, rather than merely being told to you. And this is worth dwelling on, because it is one of the cleanest examples of how this show used its open spaces. For years, the relationship between Marceline and Bubblegum was something the show implied, and the fans read, and the writers smiled about, and did not confirm. It lived in the breathing room. It was a mystery the audience was invited to fill. And then, at the very end of the series, the show made it explicit, and the explicitness landed with the weight of everything that had gone unspoken before it. The years of withholding were not the show being coy, they were the show building pressure. When the door finally opened, it opened onto something the audience had been allowed to want for a very long time. That is what the open space was for. It was not an absence of answer. It was the slow construction of an answer you would feel rather than be told. The relationship between Marceline and the show's buried history deepens through small, strange episodes scattered across the central seasons, and one of the most revealing is Memory of a Memory, Season 3, Episode 3. In it, Finn and Jake travel inside Marceline's mind, moving through her memories, and what they find there is a portrait of a person built out of loss and stubbornness, a person who has lived so long that her interior life has become an archive. The episode plays as a quirky adventure, Finn and Jake bouncing through dreamlike mindscapes, but underneath it is the show establishing something it will spend years confirming. Marceline is not a teenager. Marceline is ancient, and her youthful appearance is a mask over 1,000 years of accumulated memory. And this is the show planting another of its great open spaces, the space of Marceline's age, and what it means to outlive everyone. The show lets you glimpse the museum of her memory without ever giving you the full inventory. You see fragments, a song, a father, a loss, and the rest stays in shadow. 1,000 years you can sense the weight of, but never fully see. The show keeps Marceline deep by keeping most of her hidden, and the hiddenness is not stinginess. It is the same principle that buries the apocalypse and refuses to explain GOLB. A character you can never fully know is a character who stays alive across 1,000 years of story, because there is always more of her left to discover, and the discovering never has to end. Before we go down into the darker layers of the world, it is worth resting, for a little while, in the kind of episode that has no darkness in it at all, because those episodes are not a break from the show's meaning. They are the show's meaning shown plainly, in daylight, without the tragedy underneath. Adventure Time, for all its buried apocalypse and erased minds, spent an enormous amount of its running time on small, warm, contented things. And the contentment is not filler. It is the thing all the suffering is in service of. The show is about people taking care of each other in a broken world, and sometimes it simply shows you the taking care, with nothing wounded about it, and lets you feel how much it matters precisely because you know what the world costs to build. Take an episode like James Baxter the Horse, Season 5, Episode 19. Its entire premise is a horse who balances on a ball and makes people happy, and Finn and Jake become obsessed with learning how he does it, with understanding the secret of how one being can simply, reliably, bring joy to others. There is no villain. There is no apocalypse showing through the cracks. There is a horse, a ball, and the small profound question of how you make someone feel better when they are sad. And the answer the episode arrives at is that you cannot fake it, that the joy James Baxter brings comes from a place of genuine, uncomplicated goodness that Finn and Jake cannot simply copy. The episode is light as air, and it is, quietly, about the same thing the grocery store is about, holding back the dark for someone. James Baxter just does it in daylight on a beach, balancing on a ball instead of in the ruins of New York with a cracking voice. Or take Time Sandwich, Season 5, Episode 33. An episode whose entire conflict is that Jake has made the perfect sandwich and a magical creature wants to eat it. That is the stakes. A sandwich. And the show treats the making of that sandwich with a reverence usually reserved for cosmic events, lingering on each ingredient, on Jake's total absorption in the craft of it, on the small, complete world of a person doing one thing perfectly, because the doing is its own reward. It is a comedy about a sandwich. It is also, underneath, a portrait of contentment, of what it looks like when a being in this wounded world gets to simply make something good and enjoy it. And the show gives that contentment as much loving attention as it gives its tragedies. Because to this show, the contentment is not less important than the tragedy. It is the point of surviving the tragedy at all. And the show was capable of taking this all the way into pure, almost plotless stillness, as it did in Jake the Brick, Season 6, Episode 20. In it, Jake decides to fulfill a lifelong wish to become a brick in a crumbling house, and experience, fully present, the slow collapse of a wall during a rainstorm. He has Finn broadcast his experience over the radio, and across characters stop what they are doing and listen to Jake narrate the rain, the wind, the small movements of a rabbit nearby, the texture of simply being somewhere completely. Almost nothing happens. A wall falls down. A dog feels at peace. And it is one of the most beloved episodes the show ever made, precisely because it dares to be about nothing except the value of paying complete attention to a single quiet moment. For a show that will spend its finale singing that the moment stays true forever, this is the thesis in miniature. Jake, becoming a brick, is practicing the exact thing the finale's song is about, being fully inside one moment, on purpose, because the moment is enough. And then there is Bad Jubies, Season 7, Episode 20, which takes the coziest possible version of this idea and makes it the entire episode. A storm is coming, an enormous, dangerous, world-shaking storm, and Finn and Jake and BMO respond not with a quest to stop it, but with the simple, ancient act of gathering supplies, building a shelter, and hunkering down together to wait it out. The whole episode, animated in a distinctive stop-motion style that makes it feel handmade and tactile, is about the comfort of being safe and warm and together, while something vast and frightening passes over the world outside. They stockpile food, they seal the door, they settle in, and the danger of the storm becomes, somehow, the occasion for one of the warmest stretches the show ever produced. 3 friends in a small lit space while the dark roars past. Hold Bad Jubies next to the grocery store, because they are the same image rendered in different weather. A storm at the end of the world, and beings who cannot stop at choosing instead to face it together, in a small warm space, refusing to be alone in it. Simon held back the dark with a song. Finn and Jake and Mo hold back the storm with a sealed door and each other's company. The show keeps finding new shapes for its single deepest belief, that you cannot always stop the vast and frightening thing, the war, the storm, the chaos, the erasure, but you can refuse to face it by yourself. And that refusal, that gathering together against the dark, is the whole of what the show means by love. This is also, frankly, why a show like this works as something you fall asleep to. It is, at its core, the feeling of being safe and warm while the storm passes, told over and over, in 100 different keys. The danger is real. The shelter is real too. And the shelter is always other people. I am dwelling on these because the long journey we are taking, from a ruined grocery store toward a war the size of reality, can make Adventure Time sound like a tragedy with jokes on top, and that is not what it is. It is a show that believed, all the way down, that the small contented moments were the real treasure, and the cosmic horrors were only the weather those moments had to survive. The horse on the ball, the perfect sandwich, the dog feeling the rain, these are not detours from the story. They are what the story is for. Every wound the show inflicts, every erased mind and abandoned child and unexplained chaos, exists so that you understand the cost and the value of an ordinary good afternoon, in a world that very nearly did not get to have any more of them. The comfort is not naive. It is hard-won. It is the contentment of beings who know, somewhere underneath, exactly how fragile the daylight is, and choose to enjoy it anyway. Now, having rested in the daylight, we can go down into the dark, because the dark is where the next part of the story lives. But the world is not only relationships and tenderness. There is a darkness in that predates even the Mushroom War, and the show introduces it through its most genuinely frightening figure, the Lich. The episode is Mortal Folly, Season 2, Episode 24. It aired in April of 2011, and the Lich is unlike anything else the show had presented to that point. He is not a comic villain like the Ice King. He is not a misunderstood figure with a tragic backstory. He is, in the show's own cosmology, the embodiment of death itself, a being whose entire purpose is the extinction of all life. He speaks in a low, awful voice provided by Ron Perlman, and his goal is not power or wealth or love. His goal is the end of everything. The story of his first major appearance is the story of Finn confronting something he cannot simply punch into submission. The Lich is sealed away, and when he gets loose, the threat is not to a kingdom or a princess, but to existence as a whole. Finn faces him, and the encounter establishes the Lich as the one antagonist the show takes completely seriously, the one it never undercuts with a joke. And what matters for our larger story is that the Lich is connected to the deepest layers of the world. He is tied, eventually, to the cosmic structure that sits above Ooh, to the question of what death is, and whether it can be defeated, and what would be left if it were. He is the show's way of asking its biggest questions in the shape of a villain. Here is a theory that is not a theory at all, but confirmed canon. And I want to place it carefully because the audience for this show rightly distinguishes between what the show stated and what fans inferred. The Lich operates on a cycle. He is a being of eternal return. When he is defeated, he does not simply end. He is reborn, transformed, carried forward in a new vessel. And this reincarnation cycle is stated by the show itself, not merely guessed at by viewers. We will reach the most important expression of that cycle later in the timeline, when the Lich's essence becomes something entirely unexpected. For now, hold the idea. Death, in Adventure Time, is not a wall. It is a loop. And the question of whether a loop can ever be broken, whether the cycle of death and rebirth can be stopped or only ridden, is one the show circles for its entire run and never fully closes. The Lich is the mystery of mortality, wearing a body. Notice the pattern building. The crown is an open question. The dream logic is an open question. The relationship between Marceline and Bubblegum was an open question until it was not. The nature of the Lich and the cycle of death is an open question. The show is not vague about everything. It is precise about its surfaces and deliberately spacious about its depths. It will tell you exactly what happened in an episode and leave you to wonder forever what it means at the bottom. And the longer you watch, the more you understand that this is not a flaw in the writing. It is the writing. The depth feels real because it is never fully illuminated. You believe in the bottom of this world precisely because you can never quite see it. The show even built an entire episode around the idea underneath the Lich's cycle, and it did it in the most playful, least frightening way imaginable. Food Chain. Season 6, Episode 7, is a strange and joyful detour in which a magical entity shrinks Finn and Jake and sends them spiraling through the food chain itself, transforming them into a caterpillar, then a bird, then a bacterium, making them experience, from the inside, what it is to eat and be eaten, to die and become part of something else, to be converted from one form of life into another in an endless turning cycle. The episode is bright and silly and set to music, a far cry from the low, awful voice of the Lich, and it is, underneath, about exactly the same thing the Lich is about: the cycle of death and life, the endless conversion of matter from one living form into another, and the contrast between how Food Chain feels and what it means is the whole show. In one episode, the Lich presents the cycle of death as the ultimate horror, the embodiment of all endings. Food Chain presents the identical cycle as a delight, a wonder, a thing to sing about while you are briefly a caterpillar being eaten by a bird. Same cycle, same conversion of life into death, into life. Two completely opposite emotional registers, and both of them true. This is the show telling you that death, in Ooh, is never simply an ending, because nothing is ever destroyed, only converted, only passed forward into the next form. The Lich wants to stop the cycle, to end all life permanently, and that is why he is the one villain the show takes completely seriously, because stopping the cycle is the only true death there is. Everything else, every individual ending, is just matter changing shape. A caterpillar becoming a bird, becoming the soil, becoming the grass. Food Chain is the friendly face of the same law that everything stays sings, and the Lich threatens. Nothing is lost. It only changes form. And whether that is a comfort or a horror depends entirely, the show suggests, on whether you are afraid of becoming something else or curious about it. The first great culmination of all this planting comes at the end of Season 4. The episode is simply called The Lich, Season 4, Episode 26. It aired in 2012. And this is where the show pulls together the Enchiridion, the multiverse, the Lich, and the cosmic structure above into a single sequence that announced, definitively, that Adventure Time was a far stranger and more ambitious show than its candy surface had ever let on. The Lich manipulates Finn into helping him. The Enchiridion turns out to be a key to something enormous, and Finn and Jake are pulled out of their world entirely, into a space above the multiverse, where they encounter a being who sits at the center of all realities. That being is Prismo, a wish-granting entity who lives in a pink room outside of time, and through him the show reveals that is one of countless universes, and that wishes made in Prismo's room ripple across realities in ways that cannot be undone. The Lich uses a wish to try to extinguish all life across all worlds. Finn, to stop him, makes a counter-wish, and the consequence is the creation of an alternate timeline, a world where the Mushroom War never happened, and Finn grew up as an ordinary human boy named Penn. The show, at the climax of its 4th season, casually confirms the existence of a multiverse, alternate timelines, and a cosmology of wishes and consequences. And then, characteristically, it does not over-explain any of it. It shows you the machinery and keeps the manual closed. Before we follow the wish into the alternate timeline, the immediate aftermath of the Lich's first defeat deserves attention, because it shows how the show refuses to let even its victories stay clean. The episode is Mortal Recoil, Season 2, Episode 25, the direct sequel to Mortal Folly. The Lich, seemingly defeated, does not simply vanish. His essence survives, and it possesses Princess Bubblegum, inhabiting her body, speaking through her, turning the kingdom's beloved ruler into a vessel for the embodiment of death. The Candy People watch their princess become a monster, her body warped and decaying, the Lich looking out through her eyes. And the resolution of this is one of the show's most quietly consequential moments, the kind it plants and pays off seasons later. To save Bubblegum, to drive the Lich's essence out of her, she is restored using a process that goes wrong, and she comes back changed, younger, a 13-year-old version of herself, separated from the centuries of memory and authority that made her who she was. The show, in a children's cartoon, depicts the ruler of a kingdom being de-aged into a child and having to claw her way back to her own sovereignty. It is played, partly, for comedy, but underneath, it is the show establishing that even Bubblegum, the great maker, the controlling intelligence at the center of the Candy Kingdom, can be unmade, can be reduced, can lose the accumulated self that her power depends on. The Lich does not need to kill you to defeat you. He only needs to take away what makes you yourself. And that, you will notice, is the same thing the Crown does to Simon. The show keeps finding new bodies for the same fear. The dissolution of the self is the true death in and the Lich is only its largest face. The aftermath of that wish opens Season 5, and it is one of the most fascinating detours the show ever took. The episodes are Finn the Human and Jake the Dog, the first 2 of Season 5. Finn finds himself in the alternate timeline his wish created, the world without the Mushroom War, where he is just a regular human boy in a world full of regular humans. And the show uses this to ask a quiet, enormous question. Is the broken world worth it? Would Finn trade the magic and the danger and the loss for an ordinary life on an unbroken Earth? The answer the episodes arrive at is complicated, and Finn ultimately undoes the alternate timeline, choosing the broken over the healed Earth, because the broken is where the people he loves exist. Let that sit for a second, because it is one of the show's quiet theses about itself. Given the chance to erase the apocalypse, to live in a world that was never destroyed, Finn chooses the destruction, not because he wants suffering, but because the suffering is inseparable from the love. Jake exists in the broken world. Princess Bubblegum exists in the broken world. The whole strange family of exists only because the bombs fell and the magic returned and the survivors rebuilt something new. To undo the war would be to undo them. The healing wound cannot be unwounded without erasing everyone who grew in the scar. And the show lets that paradox stand. It does not resolve it into a lesson. It just lets Finn choose his broken world and move on, carrying the knowledge of the other one. But the alternate timeline does not simply vanish when Finn undoes it, and the way the show handles its survival is one of the cleanest demonstrations of its cosmology that it ever attempted. Years later, in Crossover, Season 7, Episode 23, the alternate timeline Finn returns. The version who grew up as a human boy named Penn in a world the show calls Farm World, an unbroken Earth where the bombs never fell. He comes across the multiverse, into the broken Ooh, and for a stretch, the two Finns exist side by side. The one who was raised in the scar, and the one who was raised in the world the scar never touched. The episode is a chaotic, fast adventure on its surface, full of multiversal collision and cosmic energy. Underneath, it is the show staging a conversation between the two answers to the question Finn the human asked. And the conversation has no winner, which is exactly the point. The Farmworld Finn is not a happier, healed version who shames the broken one. He is his own person, shaped by his own world, carrying his own losses, because Farmworld is not paradise either, only a different arrangement of damage. The show could have used the alternate Finn to deliver a verdict, to say that the unbroken world was better or that the broken world was better. It does neither. It lets the two timelines exist at once, refusing to collapse them into a single truth, exactly the way it refuses to collapse the pillow world or the coma reading or any of its other suspended possibilities. The multiverse is the cosmic scale version of the breathing room. It is the show insisting that the world you got is one of many that could have been, that the wish Finn made branched reality rather than overwriting it, and that nothing, once it exists, can be entirely unmade. The mushroom war cannot be deleted. It can only be branched away from, into another world that has its own wounds. Even the multiverse obeys the law of conservation. Nothing is destroyed. Everything stays, somewhere, on some other branch. The show also planted, early, a quiet thread about Jake's relationship to his own mortality, and it is one of the most haunting examples of a question left deliberately open. In The New Frontier, Season 3, Episode 18, Jake becomes convinced, through a dream, that he is going to die, and rather than fight it or fear it, he approaches the prospect with an eerie calm, a sense that his death has been foretold, and that there is a kind of peace in accepting it. The episode does not end with Jake dying. The prophecy does not come true, not then. But the show never quite lets go of the idea, and Jake's strange serenity about his own end becomes a recurring note, a sense that he knows something about death that the others do not, and the show never explains it. It never confirms whether Jake truly has some intuition of his own ending, whether his calm is wisdom or denial, whether the dream meant anything at all. It plants the unsettling possibility and lets it hang over the most cheerful character in the show, so that underneath Jake's contentment there is always this faint shadow, this acceptance of an ending he seems to have glimpsed. The show could have resolved it. It could have explained Jake's premonition, or dismissed it as a one-off dream. It chose instead to leave it open, a small permanent mystery attached to the character, least likely to carry one, because an unresolved shadow is more alive than an explained one. Even Jake the show insists, the dog who takes nothing seriously, has a depth the show will not fully illuminate. The mystery is everywhere, even in the comic relief. Especially in the comic relief. The multiverse and the cosmic structure above Ooh also reach down and touch the most grounded character in the show, and the way they do it is a perfect small example of the show planting a mystery and letting it ripen. Jake. For most of the series, Jake is simply Finn's brother, a magical stretching dog, the comic and loyal heart of the show. But the question of what Jake actually is, where his powers come from, why a dog can reshape his body across any size and form, lingers unanswered for years. Episodes like Jake the Dad, Season 5, Episode 6, show Jake becoming a parent himself, having children with Lady Rainicorn, and through his family the show keeps circling the question of his nature, without ever quite landing on it. When the answer finally comes, late in the series, it is characteristically cosmic, and characteristically underexplained. Jake's powers, it is revealed, originate from contact with an extraplanetary entity, a deity-like being from beyond the world. And Jake is, in some sense, more than the dog he appears to be. But the show delivers this revelation almost casually, late, and refuses to make it the center of anything. Jake does not change because of what he learns about himself. He remains Jake. The cosmic origin is real and confirmed, and the show declines to dwell on it, because the show is more interested in who Jake chooses to be. His loyalty, his contentment, his refusal to take the universe too seriously, than in the metaphysics of where he came from. Even when Adventure Time hands you an answer about its cosmology, it treats the answer as less important than the character. The mystery of Jake's nature is real, and the show resolves it in a way that somehow keeps it from mattering, which is its own kind of leaving open. The fact is settled. The meaning is left for you. Now we arrive at one of the two great fan theories I promised to be honest about, and the episode that feeds it most directly. King Worm, Season 4, Episode 18. In this episode, Finn is trapped inside a series of dreams by a creature called the King Worm, and the dreams fold into one another, growing increasingly surreal and unsettling, mixing characters and memories and fears into a shifting dreamscape that Finn must navigate to wake himself up. The episode is a showcase for the show's dream logic, its willingness to let reality become unstable, and it is one of the cornerstones that a certain reading of the entire series is built upon. That reading is the coma theory, and I am going to state plainly what it is, because the audience deserves the distinction. The coma theory holds that the entire world of Adventure Time is not real in the way the show presents it, but is instead the interior experience of a single person, most often imagined as a child or a survivor, lying unconscious, generating ooh as a kind of protective dream. Under this reading, the post-apocalyptic setting, the strange logic, the recurring dreams within dreams, the way the world bends around emotional truth rather than physical law, are all symptoms of a mind constructing a comforting fantasy over a much darker reality. It is an elegant theory, and it is genuinely seductive, because the show gives it so much to feed on. But here is the honest truth, and I will not soften it. The coma theory has no canonical support. The show never confirms it. The creators never endorsed it. It is a fan reading, an interpretation built on the show's dream-heavy texture and its willingness to leave reality flexible. And within the actual story, ooh is real. The apocalypse genuinely happened, and the events have weight and consequence. What makes the coma theory worth discussing is not that it is true, because it is not, but that the show created exactly the kind of open, dream-permeable space in which such a theory could grow and never be disproven. The show never went out of its way to deny it. It simply kept telling its story as though ooh were real, while leaving enough dream logic in the texture that you could, if you wanted, read the whole thing as a sleeping mind. The coma theory is a fan reading the show invited and never closed. That is its entire status, and that is exactly the kind of breathing room this essay is about. Think about why that matters for our larger argument. A lesser show would either confirm the dream reading, collapsing the whole world into a twist, or aggressively deny it, slamming the door and insisting on its own solidity. Adventure Time does neither. It lets the question stay open, not because it is undecided, but because the openness is more valuable than any answer. A world you can almost doubt is a world that feels deeper than a world you cannot. The coma theory is the show's flexibility made visible. It is what happens when a story leaves enough room for the audience to dream inside it. The theory is fan-made, but the room it lives in was built on purpose. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Around this same stretch of the timeline, the show gives Finn his first real relationship, and it uses it to explore something the rest of the series keeps circling: the way that love in ooh is always shaped by damage. The arc begins in Incendium, Season 3, Episode 26, when Jake, trying to cheer up a heartbroken Finn, seeks out a princess for him, and finds the Flame Princess, a being made of living fire, the daughter of the Flame King, raised in isolation because her power is considered too dangerous to be allowed near anyone. She is, from her very introduction, a person defined by the fact that the people who should have protected her decided she was a threat instead. The relationship deepens in Hot to the Touch, Season 4, Episode 1, and across the episodes that follow, and the show is careful and unusual in how it handles it. Finn and the Flame Princess cannot simply be together. Her fire burns what it touches. His water-based body and the wet world around him are physically dangerous to her, and she is dangerous to him in turn. Their love is, literally, elementally incompatible. The show does not present this as a romantic obstacle to be overcome with a grand gesture. It presents it as a fact, a real limit, two people who care for each other and whose natures make closeness a constant negotiation. The show lets the relationship be genuinely difficult, and it lets it cause genuine harm, because Finn, young and clumsy with his own heart, makes mistakes that wound her. Those mistakes come to a head in Frost and Fire, Season 5, Episode 30, and the episode is one of the show's clearest portraits of how a wound passed down becomes a wound passed on. Finn, manipulated partly by the Ice King and partly by his own confused desires, engineers a conflict between the Flame Princess and the Ice King so that he can watch them fight, because the dreams he has been having of the two of them battling have become something he wants to make real. When the Flame Princess discovers his manipulation, she ends the relationship, and she is right to. Finn treated her feelings as a means to his own emotional gratification. The boy hero, the good guy, did something genuinely selfish and hurtful, and the show does not excuse it. It lets Finn face the consequence. It lets the Flame Princess walk away with her dignity and her anger intact. And here is what matters for our larger story. The Flame Princess was created, in a sense, by the same logic that created Goliad and the Lich and the broken figures all through Ooh. She is the product of a parent who saw her power and chose fear over love, who locked her away rather than raise her, who taught her that she was dangerous before she ever had the chance to be anything else. And when she finally finds someone who treats her as a person, that person, Finn, still partly fails her, because Finn is himself a child shaped by abandonment, raised without his own parents, working out his understanding of love through trial and damage. The wound moves from the Flame King to the Flame Princess to the relationship to Finn and back. This is the show's quiet, unstated thesis about its own characters. Almost everyone in Ooh is the survivor of someone else's failure, and the only thing that breaks the chain is the slow, imperfect, repeated work of choosing to do better. The show does not resolve whether Finn ever fully learns. It leaves his growth open, season after season, the way real growth stays open. There is no episode where Finn becomes finished. There is only the long accumulation of him becoming slightly better. And it is directly out of this heartbreak that we arrive at the episode that, more than almost any other, embodies this entire idea. The one that sits at the very center of everything this story is doing. Puhoi, it is Season 5, Episode 16. And it is, on its surface, a small and strange and gentle episode, and underneath it is one of the most quietly profound things the show ever did. The story begins with Finn anxious about his relationship with Flame Princess, retreating into the tree fort, and falling through a hidden passage into a world made entirely of pillows. A soft, warm, endless pillow dimension. And in that pillow world, Finn does not simply have a quick adventure and leave. He stays. He meets a pillow person, falls in love, marries her, builds a life, has children, watches those children grow, grows old himself, becomes an elder, a grandfather, a whole man with a whole lifetime behind him. He lives an entire human life in the pillow dimension. And only at the very end, as an old man near death, surrounded by the family he built across decades, does he find the way home, and step through, and return to the tree fort as a young boy again, having been gone, in the real world, for only a few moments. The lifetime he lived collapses behind him, and the episode raises the question without ever answering it. Was the pillow world real? Did Finn truly live that life? Or was it a dream, a vision, a passage through some pocket of reality that the show declines to define? Stay with the strangeness of that for a moment, because it is one of the gentlest and most unsettling things the show ever did. Finn lives decades inside that pillow world. He learns the small private language of a marriage. He knows the particular weight of his children when they are small, and the particular ache of watching them grow beyond him. He becomes old, the way people become old, slowly, in a body that was once young and is now not, surrounded by a whole accumulated life of mornings and arguments and quiet evenings. And then he finds a door, and steps through it, and all of it is gone. Not as a tragedy he mourns, but as a thing that simply does not follow him back, like a dream dissolving in the first minutes of waking, when you can still feel that it mattered, but can no longer hold what it was. He returns to the tree fort a boy, and only a few moments have passed, and the entire lifetime he lived is already fading, already becoming the ghost of a feeling, rather than a set of memories. And there is something about that shape that lands with particular weight on anyone drifting towards sleep, because it is the shape of sleep itself. You lie down for what feels like a few minutes and a whole world unfolds, vivid and complete and emotionally real, and then you wake, and it collapses behind you, and you are left holding only the residue of having been somewhere, having lived something that you can no longer quite reach. Puhoi is the show rendering that exact experience, and refusing to tell you it was only a dream, refusing to tell you it was real, letting it be the thing a life inside sleep actually is, which is something that mattered completely while it lasted, and cannot be verified at all afterward. The show treats this not as frightening, but as tender, almost holy. The idea that you can live a whole truth that leaves no proof, and that the leaving no proof does not make it false. It only makes it the kind of true that you have to have been there for. The show does not tell you. That is the entire point of Puhoi. It gives Finn an entire life. A wife, children, old age, the full weight of a human existence. And then it refuses to confirm whether any of it happened in any way that the word happened can hold. And it does not treat this as a problem to be solved. It treats it as a wonder to be felt. Finn returns, slightly changed, carrying the ghost of a life he may or may not have lived, and the show moves on. The episode is also where careful viewers note one of the earliest glimpses of an iconography that will matter enormously later, but for now what matters is the shape of the thing. Puhoi is the coma theory in miniature, contained in a single episode. A whole reality, a whole life, possibly a dream, never confirmed, never denied, and presented not as a trick, but as a gift. This is the breathing room made into a complete story. Puhoi does not have a twist. It does not pull the rug out and reveal that it was all a dream, nor does it insist that the pillow world was solidly real. It simply lets both possibilities exist at once, and asks you to sit in the uncertainty, and finds that the uncertainty is beautiful, rather than frustrating. And once you see Puhoi clearly, you start to see that the whole show is built this way. The pillow world is a dream is real, is post-apocalyptic Earth, is a child's protective fantasy, is 1,000 years of genuine history. All of it is held in suspension. The show refuses to collapse the wave. And that refusal, episode after episode, is what gives Adventure Time its particular feeling of depth without bottom. You are always standing on a floor that might be a surface. And the show wants you there. The not knowing is where the wonder lives. Now we cross into the heart of the series, the long central run, where the show's biggest arcs unfold and its deepest characters come fully into focus. We have the Foundation, the Apocalypse, the Crown, the Lich, the Multiverse, the Dream Logic. We have met the open questions. From here, the story stops being a collection of quests and becomes a set of intertwined tragedies and reconciliations, each one feeding the central idea that this world grows by what it leaves unresolved. And no thread runs deeper through that central run than the one that began in the grocery store. The thread of Simon, and the crown, and the woman who loved him before he became the King of Ice. That woman is Betty, and her story is one of the most painful and least comforting in the entire series, which is why it is so important to a journey like this one, where the theories are framed as comforting mysteries. Betty was Simon's fiancée before the war, before the crown, before any of it, and across the show's run she returns. The episode Betty, Season 5, Episode 48, brings her into the present-day story, pulled forward through time, arriving in a world 1,000 years after the one she knew, to find that the kind, brilliant man she was going to marry is now a raving, frozen creature who does not know her. And Betty makes a choice that defines her. She decides to save him. She decides to fix what the crown did. She dedicates herself, completely, to undoing the tragedy. And here the show does something cruel and honest. It shows you that love, even total and selfless love, is not enough to undo certain kinds of damage. Betty pursues every avenue. She becomes a sorceress. She bends her entire existence around the single goal of restoring Simon. And the pursuit consumes her, warps her, drives her toward the same kind of self-erasure that took Simon himself. The show draws a terrible rhyme between them. The crown took Simon by offering him the power to protect someone he loved. Betty loses herself by chasing the power to save someone she loves. The very devotion that makes her admirable is the thing that destroys her. And the show does not flinch from showing that the wound the crown opened may simply be too deep to close. I want to be honest that this thread is not, on its own, a comforting one. Betty's story is a hard story, but it belongs in a nostalgic journey through precisely because of how the show eventually frames it, which is not as a hopeless tragedy, but as a question left open in a way that allows for grace. The show does not resolve Betty and Simon into a happy ending, and it does not resolve them into a final despair either. It leaves their fate, ultimately, suspended inside the cosmic chaos that the series builds toward, and in doing so it transforms a story about the failure of love into a story about the persistence of love through transformation. The wound does not close, but the love does not end. The show holds both, and the holding is the comfort. not resolution. Continuation. The central run also gives us the answer to a question Finn has carried since the beginning, and the answer is one of the show's most devastating choices. Who is Finn's father? The episodes are Wake Up and Escape from the Citadel, Season 6, Episodes 1 and 2. They aired in April of 2014, and they bring Finn face to face with his father, Martin, a man he has never known, who turns out to be alive, imprisoned in a multiversal prison called the Citadel for crimes across realities. Finn, who has dreamed his whole life of finding his father, finally reaches him, and his father does not care. That is the wound at the center of these episodes. Martin is not a noble prisoner, not a tragic hero, not a man who was torn from his son against his will. He is a selfish, manipulative man who abandoned Finn and feels no particular pull toward him now. When the Citadel breaks open and Martin has a chance to escape, he takes it, and he leaves his son behind without hesitation. Finn reaches out to stop him, to hold on to the father he just found, and in the chaos of the escape, the cosmic blood of an imprisoned, dying creature spills, and Finn loses his arm. He is left floating in the water, his arm gone, watching his father disappear into the multiverse, having gained and lost the thing he wanted most in the same moment. The show, in the final scene, does the thing it does best. It strips everything away. Finn floats in the water. His arm is gone. A small flower has begun to grow from the stump where it used to be. And the show does not add music to tell you how to feel. It does not give Finn a speech. It does not resolve the loss. It just holds on the image, the boy and the missing arm and the impossible flower, and lets you feel the enormity of what just happened without a single word guiding you. That flower, growing from the wound, is the show in a single image. Something new and alive, rising directly out of the place where something was lost. And this episode contains one of the most important pieces of confirmed canon in the entire series. The one that connects the Lich's cycle of death to the future of the whole world. The blood that costs Finn his arm comes from a guardian, a being tied to the Lich's essence. And from that spilled cosmic matter, something is born, an infant. The show will reveal, across later episodes, that this child carries the Lich's essence transformed, the embodiment of death reincarnated into something new. The being grows into Sweet Pea, a sweet and innocent child who is, in the show's own confirmed telling, the Lich reborn, the cycle of eternal return, made flesh in a form that is the opposite of what it came from. This is not a fan theory. The show states it. Death itself is reincarnated as a gentle child. The loop bends toward tenderness. It is worth slowing down on what Martin actually does in the moment of escape, because the show makes a precise choice that defines the entire relationship. When the Citadel breaks open, Martin has the chance to flee, and Finn, his son, is in danger in the chaos. A father, any father the show has taught you to imagine, would reach for the child. Martin reaches for the exit. He uses the bodies and the confusion around him as cover. He treats his son's presence as an inconvenience to his escape, rather than a reason to stay. And the show does not give him a moment of hesitation, a flicker of paternal instinct that he then suppresses. It denies you even that small comfort. Martin simply does not want Finn the way Finn wants him. The asymmetry is total, and the show refuses to soften it. And the show asks, through this, one of its hardest questions. The question that opens the entire second half of the series. What does a person do when the thing they spent their life longing for turns out not to want them back? Finn built an identity around the absence of his father, around the hope of him, around the wound of not knowing him. And the answer to the wound, when it finally arrives, is worse than the wound. The father is alive, and the father does not care. The show does not tell Finn or you how to survive that. It just shows Finn surviving it, slowly, across the seasons that follow, learning that the absent father was never going to be the answer to anything, that Finn would have to become his own answer. The question of how you father yourself when your father will not is left open, and Finn spends the rest of the show living inside it, which is the only honest way to answer a question that size. Hold that image alongside the flower growing from Finn's stump, because they are the same image. Out of the worst thing, something gentle. Out of the embodiment of death, an innocent child. Out of a lost arm, a flower. The show keeps making this shape, this insistence that the wound is also the site of new growth, that the apocalypse that ended the world is the same event that created and the Lich to Sweet Pea cycle is the largest expression of it. The being whose only purpose was to end all life becomes a child who embodies life. The cycle of death does not stop. It transforms. And whether that transformation is a victory or merely the next turn of an endless wheel is, characteristically, a question the show leaves open. It shows you the transformation and lets you decide whether the loop has been broken or simply made beautiful for one revolution. What the show does next with Finn is one of its most psychologically precise stretches, because it refuses to let the loss of the father and the loss of the arm resolve quickly or cleanly. In The Tower, Season 6, Episode 4, Finn, still raw from the abandonment, develops a new arm made of psychic energy, an arm he builds out of the sheer force of his desire for revenge against Martin. He uses it to construct a tower, reaching higher and higher into space, climbing toward the father who left him, driven by a fantasy of confrontation. The episode is, on its surface, a strange and almost comic premise. A boy building an impossible tower with a magic arm. Underneath, it is one of the most accurate portraits of grief the show ever attempted, because what Finn is actually doing in the tower is refusing to accept the loss. The psychic arm is made of his refusal. He would rather build an endless tower toward a father who does not want him than sit in the truth that the father is gone and was never going to be what Finn needed. And the show lets him climb, lets the fantasy build, until it gently dismantles it, until Finn understands that the tower is not really about reaching Martin at all, that it is about the unbearable feeling he is trying to escape by turning grief into a mission. When the realization comes, the arm dissolves, because it was only ever made of the refusal, and once the refusal goes, the arm has nothing to be made of. The show is telling you something about how grief actually works that very few children's programs would dare. You cannot build your way out of a loss. You cannot turn it into a quest with a destination. At some point, the tower has to come down, and you have to stand on the ground, armless, and simply feel the thing you have been climbing to avoid. And then, with the patience the show always brought to its deepest wounds, it lets the arm come back, but not through revenge and not through force. In Breezy, Season 6, Episode 6, the flower that has been growing from Finn's stump becomes the center of the story, and the regrowth of his arm is tied, strangely and beautifully, to a bee and a flower, and the simple processes of life continuing. Finn, in this stretch, is emotionally adrift, behaving in ways that are not his best, working through the damage of the citadel by retreating from his own depth into shallowness. And it is only as he moves through that, as the flower on his stump blooms and is pollinated and completes a small natural cycle, that a new arm finally emerges, grown rather than built, given rather than seized. Sit with the difference between those two arms, because the show built the contrast on purpose. The first arm, in the tower, Finn makes out of rage, and it dissolves because a self built on revenge cannot hold. The second arm, in Breezy, Finn does not make at all. It grows, the way the flower grows from the stump, the way Ooh grew from the ruins, the way Sweet Pea grew from the Lich's spilled blood. The healthy regrowth is not seized. It is the same shape as every other piece of new life in this show, rising on its own from the side of a wound, once the wound is allowed to simply be a wound. Finn gets his arm back not when he conquers his grief, but when he stops fighting it long enough for something new to grow in its place. The show keeps making the same quiet promise. What is lost does not come back as itself, but the place where it was lost is exactly where the new thing grows. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The central run is also where the show develops its most complex character, the one whose entire existence is built on a single act of creation and the responsibilities it carries. Princess Bubblegum. To understand her, you have to understand that she is not a princess in any ordinary sense. She is the ruler of the Candy Kingdom because she created the Candy Kingdom. She is a scientist, a maker, who built the Candy People with her own hands out of biomass, and who has ruled them for centuries. An episode like Goliad, Season 4, Episode 10, shows you the weight of this. Bubblegum, aware that she is not immortal, attempts to create an heir, a successor to watch over her people when she is gone, and the attempt goes wrong, producing a being of enormous power and no compassion. The horror of Goliad is a quiet, philosophical horror. Bubblegum tries to pass on her values, her sense of duty, her care for the Candy People, and she discovers that you cannot simply build a caretaker. Goliad has Bubblegum's intelligence and power, but not her conscience, and the result is a creature that sees the candy people as things to be controlled rather than beings to be protected. The episode is, underneath its action, an essay on the limits of creation. You can make a mind. You cannot guarantee a soul. And Bubblegum, who has spent her existence making things, has to confront the possibility that the most important thing about her care for her people, might be the one thing she cannot pass down. This connects to one of the show's most fascinating and morally complicated portraits. Princess Bubblegum is not a simple good ruler. She surveils her people. She manipulates them. She makes decisions about their lives without their consent, because she made them and she believes she knows best. The show does not present this as straightforwardly villainous, nor as straightforwardly justified. It leaves the question of Bubblegum's sovereignty genuinely open. Is she a benevolent guardian or a benevolent tyrant? The answer the show offers is that she is both, and that the two cannot be separated, because her authority comes from the same source as her care. She rules because she is the substance her subjects are made of. The candy people are, in a literal sense, her body politic, and whether that makes her rule legitimate is a question the show poses and refuses to settle. And the show gives this question a face, a recurring, unbearable face, in the figure of the Earl of Lemongrab. To understand him, you have to go back to a small detail that the show treats almost as a throwaway and then refuses to let go of. Lemongrab is one of Bubblegum's creations, an early attempt at an heir, a candy being she made and then put aside because he came out wrong. He is sour where she wanted sweetness. He is rigid and frightened and incapable of the warmth she was trying to build into him. And the episode You Made Me, Season 4, Episode 20, brings the consequences of that abandonment back to her door. Lemongrab, exiled to his own lonely castle, comes back into Bubblegum's life, demanding something he cannot quite name. And the title of the episode is the whole accusation. You made me. You made me this way, and then you left me alone with it. Sit with what that title is doing, because it is the Goliad horror, restated from the other side. Goliad asked whether a creator can pass down a conscience. You Made Me asks what a creator owes the thing she made imperfectly. Lemongrab is not a villain in any clean sense. He is a being brought into existence by someone who then decided he was a mistake, and who handled the mistake by sending it far enough away that she would not have to look at it. He is lonely in the specific, structural way that only a discarded creation can be lonely, because the person responsible for his loneliness is the same person responsible for his existence. And the show does not let Bubblegum off the hook. It makes her look at him. It makes her sit inside the discomfort of having made a person and failed him, and it refuses to resolve that discomfort into either forgiveness or condemnation. The question of what we owe the things we bring into the world, badly, the question that haunts every parent and every maker, the show poses through a screaming lemon man and declines, completely, to answer. The Lemongrab thread curdles into something genuinely disturbing in Too Old. Season 5, Episode 31. An episode that most people remember as the one where Finn reunites with an aged-up Princess Bubblegum and then move past. And the moving past is a mistake, because the real weight of the episode is what has happened to Lemongrab. Given a kingdom of his own, and a duplicate of himself for company, Lemongrab has descended into a kind of tyranny, ruling his lemon people through fear, devouring those who displease him, building a regime out of his own loneliness and damage. The being Bubblegum discarded has become a small dictator, and the cruelty he inflicts is the cruelty that was inflicted on him, passed downward, the way it always passes downward in this show. And here, the chain becomes visible in its full, terrible length. Bubblegum makes Lemongrab badly and abandons him. Lemongrab, abandoned, becomes a tyrant who creates and abuses his own people. Out of that abuse will eventually come Lemonhope, the child we will follow later, who wants nothing more than to escape the entire chain of damaged making he was born into. The wound moves from the creator to the creation to the creation's creations, generation after generation, exactly the way the crown's damage moved from Simon outward, exactly the way Martin's abandonment will move into Finn. This is the show building its quietest and most insistent argument, the one underneath all the cosmic spectacle. Damage is inherited. It is passed down through the act of making and raising and failing, from one generation to the next, and the only thing that ever interrupts the inheritance is someone, somewhere in the chain, choosing to absorb the damage instead of passing it on. The show keeps showing you the chain, so that the rare moments of someone breaking it will mean what they should. Before we leave Bubblegum, It is worth watching her in a register the show rarely let her occupy, the register of pure competence in the field, because it reveals something the throne room hides. In Lady and Peebles, Season 4, Episode 19, Finn and Jake have gone missing, and it is Princess Bubblegum and Lady Rainicorn, Jake's partner, who go out into the dark to find them. The episode strips away the kingdom and the court and the politics, and leaves Bubblegum as what she fundamentally is, a brilliant, resourceful, slightly frightening problem solver who will do whatever the situation requires. There is a moment when they finally find the missing pair and confront the threat holding them, where Bubblegum reveals a depth of cold capability that the candy surface had never shown, a willingness to be ruthless that sits just under the pink exterior. And the episode matters because it shows you that Bubblegum's competence is not a costume she wears over softness. It is real, and it is a little terrifying, and the show wants you to see that the same intelligence that builds candy people and tends a frightened brother can also do hard, cold, necessary things without flinching. Lady and Peebles is the show refusing to let Bubblegum be only sympathetic, the same way it refuses to let her be only tyrannical. It keeps adding facets, the maker, the manipulator, the sister, the field operative who will not lose the people under her protection, until she becomes too complex to summarize, which is exactly the point. The show builds her the way it builds the world, by accumulating more than it ever resolves, so that you end up knowing her completely, and being unable to say, finally, what she is. A person you can fully describe is a person the show has flattened. Bubblegum, it makes sure, can never be flattened. Bubblegum's complexity is woven through the entire series, and it sharpens her relationships into something fascinating. Her long history with Marceline gains its weight from the fact that Bubblegum is so guarded, so controlled, so unwilling to be vulnerable. Her relationship with Finn, who has a childhood crush on her that the show handles with surprising maturity, is shaped by the gap between his youthful idealization and her ancient, complicated reality. And her relationship with her own people is shaped by the central tension of her existence, the fact that she loves them and controls them in the same gesture. The show keeps Bubblegum interesting by keeping her unresolved. She is never fully condemned and never fully absolved. She is allowed to be a complete and contradictory person, which in a children's cartoon is its own quiet radicalism. The show finds the tenderness underneath all that control in a small, easily missed episode, Bonnie and Nettie, Season 7, Episode 1. Nettie is Bubblegum's brother, in a sense, another being grown from the same original gum, a creature who is non-verbal, frightened, and hidden away in the heart of the Candy Kingdom, attached to the great tree whose sap sustains the realm. Most of the candy people do not even know he exists, and when Nettie is disturbed and bolts in panic through the kingdom, the episode reveals a Bubblegum almost no one else gets to see, gentle, patient, soft-voiced, coaxing her frightened brother back to safety, with a care that has nothing of the tyrant in it at all. And the episode matters, because it shows you the other half of Bubblegum, the half her control is built to protect. She manages and surveils and manipulates a whole kingdom, yes, but underneath the management is this: a sister tending a frightened sibling no one else can reach, a maker who loves the fragile thing she made enough to keep its existence secret, so the world cannot frighten it further. The control and the tenderness are the same thing seen from different angles, exactly as the show insists about everything. Bubblegum guards her people the way she guards Nettie, jealously, anxiously, sometimes wrongly, because she made them, and she cannot bear to lose them, having already lost so much in the empty world she woke up into. The show does not resolve whether her guarding is love or control. It shows you Nettie, and lets you understand that for Bubblegum the two were never separable, that the impulse to protect and the impulse to dominate grew from the same root, the unbearable loneliness of being the only conscious thing in a world that ended before she arrived. We should pause here on a character who sits at the strangest angle to the whole question of what is real in this world, because this character feeds the second fan theory I promised to address honestly. Mo is a small living video game console, a member of Finn and Jake's household, a childlike artificial being with an enormous interior life. An episode like Mo Noir, Season 4, Episode 17, shows you that interior life directly, dropping you into Mo's imagination, where Bimo is a hard-boiled detective in a black and white film, narrating a noir story that is, in reality, the simple matter of a missing sock. Bimo lives inside fantasies. BMO blurs the line between what is happening and what BMO imagines is happening, constantly, joyfully, and without any clear marker of where one ends and the other begins. And this is the root of the unreliable narrator theory, which I will state as plainly as I stated the coma theory. The theory holds that Mo, who in the finale becomes a kind of framing storyteller for the entire saga, cannot be trusted to relay events accurately, because Mo's entire mode of being is the blurring of fantasy and reality. Under this reading, some or all of what we see, especially anything filtered through BMO's perspective, might be BMO's embellishment, BMO's imagination, BMO's story, rather than a faithful record. It is again a genuinely interesting reading, and again, I have to be honest with you, it is a fan theory. The show does not confirm that BMO is an unreliable narrator. The events of the series are presented as real within the story. What the theory has to work with is Mo's established love of fantasy, the way BMO narrates and frames, and the show's general comfort with blurred reality. The show never denies the theory, because the show never denies any of these theories. But it never states it either. Mo as unreliable narrator is a fan reading, not canon, and I want you to hold it as exactly that. But notice, once more, why the theory can exist at all. The show made a character whose defining trait is the blurring of story and reality, and then it placed that character in a position to frame the entire saga. It built the conditions for the theory, and then declined to either fulfill or refute it. This is the breathing room again, in its purest form. BMO is the breathing room given a face and a voice. BMO is the part of the show that openly loves stories more than facts, and the show loves Mo for it, and never once punishes Mo for it, and never once clarifies how much of what BMO tells us is true. The uncertainty is not a flaw in BMO, it is the whole point of BMO. And in a story that ends with BMO telling the tale, that uncertainty becomes the uncertainty of the entire history of U. The show hands the final word to its least reliable, most loving narrator, on purpose. The cosmic structure above U, the realm of Prismo and the multiverse that the show revealed at the end of Season 4, returns in a way that ties the show's love of unexplained mystery directly to the shape of time itself. Prismo, the Wishmaster who lives in a pink room outside reality, is a being whose existence is built on a paradox the show states openly and never resolves. In Is That You, Season 6, Episode 19, the show deals with the consequences of Prismo's apparent death and the strange logic of how a being who exists across time can be brought back. And the mechanism the episode uses is a loop, a causal circle with no clear beginning, a thing that exists because it will have existed, an effect that is its own cause. This is the bootstrap shape, and the show loves it, and it places it at the foundation of its cosmology on purpose. Prismo is not quite real in the way other characters are. He is the dream of a sleeping man, a projection, and yet he has agency and power and a self. The show tells you this and does not explain how a dream can be a person, how a projection can grant wishes that reshape reality, how a being can loop himself back into existence through his own future actions. It states the paradox and lets it stand, glittering and unresolved, at the very top of its universe. And this matters enormously for the coma theory, and for everything we have discussed about what is real in U, because the show has openly placed, at the highest level of its own cosmology, a being whose reality is explicitly the dream of another mind. The show is not shy about dreams generating real things. It built that principle into the architecture above the world, and it never once explains the mechanism, because the mechanism is not the point. The wonder of a self-causing loop, a dream that dreams itself, is the point. And an explained wonder is no longer a wonder, and it is in this same cosmic register, this same willingness to send Finn drifting through the spaces above ordinary reality, that the show first lets you glimpse the being who will end everything. In Astral Plane Season 6, Episode 25, Finn has an out-of-body experience, his consciousness floating free of his physical self, drifting up and out, past the world, into the vastness above it. The episode is meditative, strange, beautiful, mostly a boy contemplating creation and his place in it while his spirit moves through space. And in the far distance, almost incidentally, the show shows you something enormous, a vast figure out among the stars, a presence the episode does not name and does not explain. That presence is GOLB. The show plants its final, greatest mystery here, seasons before the finale, as a shape glimpsed at the edge of a quiet, philosophical episode, and then says nothing about it at all. This is the planting of GOLB done exactly the way the show planted everything else. The apocalypse in the background of a candy world, the Lichie's reincarnation cycle stated and set aside. Orgolorg disguised as a penguin, the being of pure chaos who will arrive at the climax of the entire saga, first appears not in a moment of dread but in a moment of peace, a faraway figure in the calm of an astral drift, present long before it matters, waiting in the architecture of the world, the way every important thing in this show waits. By the time GOLB arrives in the finale to unmake reality, it will not be a new monster invented for an ending. It will be a presence the show let you sense, briefly, far off, seasons earlier, and then decline to discuss, exactly the kind of patient, unexplained planting that makes the eventual arrival feel like something the world always contained rather than something the plot suddenly needed. GOLB was there in the calm before it was there in the catastrophe. The chaos was always at the edge of the peace, glimpsed and unexplained, breathing in the distance. Late in the series, the show produced an episode that is almost a thesis statement for everything we have been discussing, a pure distillation of its love of unresolved, reality-bending mystery. The Hall of Egress, Season 7, Episode 24. In it, Finn enters a cave and finds himself in a dungeon with a single rule that he discovers by accident. Every time he closes his eyes, the world resets, and to escape, he must navigate blindfolded, learning to move through a space he cannot see, where looking returns him to the start. The episode becomes increasingly surreal and existential, with Finn closing his eyes and reopening them to find the world transformed, the dungeon expanding, time and space behaving according to rules the episode never fully explains. The Hall of Egress is the show at its most willing to abandon plot for pure experience. There is barely a story in the conventional sense. There is a boy, a space that bends around the act of perception, and a slowly mounting sense that the rules go deeper than anyone will ever explain. The episode does not resolve into a clean answer. It does not tell you what the Hall of Egress was, or why it worked the way it did, or what it meant. It simply takes Finn and you through an experience of a reality that responds to perception rather than physics, and then lets him out, changed, without explanation. It is Puhoi again. It is the dream logic again. It is the breathing room given an entire episode to itself, and these episodes, Puhoi and King Worm, and the Hall of Egress, and the Pillow Dimensions and the Dreams Within Dreams, are the strongest evidence, not for any single theory, but for the meta point above all the theories. Adventure Time is a show that built unexplained, perception-bending, reality-flexible spaces into its own structure as a feature. The dream logic is not a glitch in an otherwise solid world. It is a load-bearing element of the world's design. The show wanted you to be a little unsure of the ground, because a world you are a little unsure of is a world that can hold more wonder. The theories the fans built were not impositions on the show. They were the natural growth of seeds the show planted on purpose. The mysteries were always meant to stay open. That is not my reading. That is the show's design, episode after episode, refusing to close the spaces it opened. The show also, in its central run, tells one of its most pointed stories about damage and freedom, and it tells it through a minor character who carries a major theme. Lemonhope. He is a creature created by the Earl of Lemongrab, who is himself a failed creation of Princess Bubblegum, a being she made, and then abandoned because he came out wrong. So Lemonhope is, from birth, a product of a chain of failed making, a child of a damaged creation of a flawed creator. His two-part story, across Season 5, in the episodes that bear his name, follows him as he is freed from captivity under Lemongrab and then has to decide what to do with that freedom. He runs as far as he can, into the wilderness, away from everyone, because the only thing he wants is to never be responsible for anyone again. And the show lets him run, and then it asks the hard question. Lemonhope is told that his people, the Lemon people, are suffering, and that he is the only one who can save them, and he does not want to. He wants his own freedom, more than he wants their salvation. And the show, remarkably, does not simply force him into heroism. It lets him grapple, genuinely, with the conflict between the self he wants to be and the duty that has been laid on him. When he finally returns to help, it is not because the show declared that duty must win. It is because he chooses it, eventually, on his own terms, after living the freedom he needed first. The show leaves open the question of whether he was right to run, whether anyone owes salvation to people they did not choose. It does not deliver a clean moral. It delivers a person, making a hard choice, and trusts you to sit with the difficulty. The chain of broken creation does not get a tidy resolution. It gets a single being deciding, freely, to break it himself. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The reveal arrives in stages, the way the show liked to do it, and the stage just before the culmination is the episode GOLB, Season 6, Episode 40, which begins to pull back the disguise on the penguin who had been waddling through the background of the Ice Kingdom for years. Gunter, the most beloved of the Ice King's penguins, the small mischievous creature, played entirely for laughs across the whole series, is shown to be something stirring underneath, something ancient and vast, beginning to remember itself. The episode plays with the awful comedy of it, the idea that this tiny, silly, much-loved thing has been a cosmic horror the entire time, dormant, biding, harmless only because it had forgotten what it was. And there is a tenderness even in this, which is easy to miss under the spectacle. The show does not simply use Gunter as a twist. It asks, quietly, what it means that a being can be reduced to so little of itself that it becomes genuinely sweet, genuinely harmless. A creature whose forgotten monstrousness made room for an actual gentleness underneath. Gunter, as Gunter, is not pretending. The penguin is real. The affection is real. It is only that there is something else underneath, waiting. And the something else is not the truth of Gunter, any more than the Ice King is the lie of Simon. The show keeps insisting that a being is not reducible to the worst or largest thing inside it, that the small loved version and the vast forgotten version are both true at once, the same way Simon and the Ice King are both true, the same way Sweet Pea and the Lich are both true. Identity, in this show, is never a single layer. It is always the daylight self and the buried self, held together, and which one is real is precisely the kind of question the show refuses to answer. The culmination arrives in The Comet, Season 6, Episode 43, the Season 6 finale. The penguin named Gunter is revealed fully for what it is. Gunter is GOLB, an ancient cosmic entity, a being of immense power who once roamed the stars and was reduced, by a catastrophe, to the form of a small penguin with no memory of its former self. And a catalyst comet, a cosmic body on a 1,000-year cycle, approaches and GOLB awakens to meet it. Notice what the show has done here, because it is the buried apocalypse trick performed again, at the cosmic scale. The most powerful being in the room had been sitting in the background for years, disguised as a joke, exactly the way the ruined Earth had been sitting in the background, disguised as a candy playground. Exactly the way the Ice King's tragedy had been sitting in the background, disguised as comic relief. The show keeps hiding its largest truths inside its smallest, silliest packages. And the comet itself introduces a cosmic cycle, a 1,000-year rhythm, that frames the entire world inside a vastly larger temporal order, the same kind of order that the finale's 1,000 years later frame will invoke. The show is telling you, as it approaches its ending, that has always been one small moment inside enormous loops of time. The comet has come before. It will come again. The penguin was a god the whole time. And the question of what GOLB truly was, what the comet truly is, where these cosmic cycles come from, the show raises and then largely sets aside, because it has a more important cosmic mystery waiting at the very end. It plants the scale and leaves the explanation open, one more time, as practice for GOLB. The same comet, the same deep cosmic cycle, also gives the show a way to reach all the way back before the Mushroom War, before human civilization, to the most ancient origin of the object that has haunted this entire story, the crown. In Evergreen, Season 6, Episode 24, the show tells a story set in the distant prehistoric past of the Earth, in an age of elementals and wizards, long before any of the characters we know. A powerful ice wizard named Evergreen, faced with a catalyst comet hurtling toward the world, the same kind of comet that returns in The Comet, attempts to craft a magical crown that will let him save the planet from the impact. The crown is built to channel enormous power, to be a tool of protection against an extinction-level threat. And here the show does the thing it loves most, which is to let an answer arrive while keeping the real mystery intact. Evergreen shows you where the crown physically came from. An ancient ice wizard. A doomed attempt to stop a comet. A tool of salvation that outlived its maker by uncountable years. But it does not explain the deepest thing, which is why the crown costs what it costs. Why protection and erasure are bound together in it so tightly that you cannot have the one without the other. You learn the crown is old. Older than the war. older than humanity, a relic of a previous age of the world that survived into Simon's hands. You learn it was made to save a world from a falling sky, and you still do not learn why saving someone with it means losing yourself. The origin deepens the mystery, rather than dissolving it. The crown is revealed to be ancient, and still refuses to be understood, which is the most Adventure Time outcome an origin story could possibly have. It tells you where the thing came from, and leaves the why exactly as open as it always was. The show kept circling Simon and the crown to the very end, and one of its most tender late returns is Broke His Crown, Season 8, Episode 1. An episode that takes place largely inside the mind, inside memory, and lets the surviving fragments of who Simon was speak again. It connects to the long thread of Betty, to the desperate, self-consuming attempt to undo what the crown did, and it shows the show still treating Simon not as a settled tragedy, but as an open wound it returns to gently, the way you return to a grief that never fully heals. The episode lets you sit inside the interior of the crown's damage one more time, lets you feel how much of Simon is still in there, buried, reachable only in fragments, present and unreachable at once. And right at the end of the series, in the first investigation, Season 10, Episode 8, the show reaches back one final time toward the truth of Simon and the crown, using the conceit of a haunted house and a buried mystery to excavate the deepest layers of his pre-war life, the antiquities, the discovery of the crown, the first whispers of the being inside it. It is the show, in its last season, still unwilling to fully close the file on its founding tragedy, still adding fragments, still deepening, rather than resolving. By the time the finale arrives, you know an enormous amount about the crown. You know its ancient origin and its pre-war discovery, and its 1,000 years of damage and the voice that whispers inside it. And you still cannot say, fully, what it is, because the show, across 10 seasons and every chance it had, chose to keep its very first mystery as open as its very last. The crown and GOLB are the bookends of the same refusal. The show would tell you everything about its mysteries except the one thing that would let you close them. As the series moves into its later seasons, it begins, gently, to deepen its central characters one last time before the end, and one of the most beautiful of these deepenings belongs to Marceline. The Stakes miniseries, an 8-part run across Season 7, gives Marceline her fullest treatment, exploring her 1,000 years of existence, her relationship with her mother, her fear of immortality, and her desire to no longer be a vampire. In the second part, Everything Stays, Season 7, Episode 7, the show gives us a song, sung by Marceline's mother, in a memory, called Everything Stays, with a lyric about how things stay the same and also change, slowly, without you noticing, like the branches of a tree. That song is one of the keys to the whole series, and it connects directly to our central idea. Everything stays, but it slowly changes. That is the show describing itself. Ooh is the earth, changed so slowly across 1,000 years that it became unrecognizable while remaining, underneath, the same wounded ground. Simon stays, transformed into the Ice King. The Lich stays, transformed into Sweet Pea. Marceline stays, 1,000 years old and still, somehow, the little girl from the grocery store. The song is the show's law of conservation. Nothing in Adventure Time is ever fully destroyed, and nothing is ever fully unchanged. Everything stays, and everything changes, and the gap between those two truths is exactly the space where all the open questions live. And the song belongs to Marceline, because Marceline is the show's great rememberer. She is the one who lived through everything, who carries the memory of Simon when Simon cannot carry it himself, who watched 1,000 years of people she loved change and fade and stay. Her interior life is a museum no one else can enter, and the show, in giving her this miniseries, is honoring the burden of memory in a world built on forgetting. The crown erases. The apocalypse erased a civilization. Sweet Pea does not remember being the Lich. And against all that forgetting, Marceline stands, remembering, holding the thread of the story together in her own person. She is the living continuity of the entire series, the one character who connects the grocery store to the finale. Before Stakes, the show had already begun to excavate Marceline's interior, and one of the most quietly important examples is The Vault, Season 5, Episode 34. In it, Marceline confronts a past self, a version of her from the early days after the war, a frightened girl she had buried and refused to remember. The episode treats memory as a literal place, a vault, where the selves you used to be are stored, sometimes locked away because they hurt too much to look at. And Marceline has to descend into that vault and face the version of herself she abandoned, the version that carried fears she did not want to keep carrying. And the show makes a quiet, profound point through this. To survive 1,000 years, Marceline has had to keep becoming new versions of herself, leaving old selves behind, locking away the ones that could not bear the weight. But the abandoned selves do not disappear. They wait in the vault. And being whole, the episode suggests, means going back for them, reclaiming the frightened girl, integrating the self you tried to leave behind. This is the show's understanding of identity made explicit. You are not a single fixed thing. You are a sequence of selves, and the work of a long life is refusing to let any of them become a ghost. The crown made Simon lose his selves involuntarily. Marceline has to choose, again and again, not to lose hers. And whether anyone can hold 1,000 years of selves together without something breaking is a question the show keeps open, because it is a question, with no final answer, only the ongoing practice of trying. There is one more piece of Marceline the show saves for nearly the very end, and it completes the portrait of why she is who she is. Her father. In Marcy and Hunson, Season 10, Episode 7, the show brings Marceline back into contact with Hunson Abadir, the ruler of the Nightosphere, a demon lord, the literal embodiment of chaos and evil in the show's mythology, and also, simply, her dad. Their relationship has always been strained, played early in the series for dark comedy, a father who is too busy ruling a realm of damned souls to attend to his daughter, who once ate her fries, a small petty wound that the show used to stand in for a much larger neglect. And this late episode lets them finally sit inside the truth of what he was, and was not to her. And here the show completes a quiet pattern it has been drawing through all of its central figures, the pattern of the inherited nature that must be chosen against. Marceline is, by birth, half demon, the daughter of evil itself, heir to a realm of chaos, and a father who embodies everything destructive. She could have been a monster. The lineage was right there, offered to her, the Nightosphere waiting to be inherited. And across 1,000 years she declines it, again and again, choosing to be the rememberer, the protector, the one who takes the curse back into herself in stakes, rather than let it harm anyone. The opposite of the chaos she was born from. The show places her, deliberately, between two fathers. Simon, who was not her father by blood, but raised her with total love and lost himself doing it. Hunson, who was her father by blood, and gave her almost nothing. And Marceline becomes who she is, by carrying Simon's gift forward, and setting Hunson's inheritance down. The show does not make this a speech. It makes it 1,000 years of choices, and it leaves open, as it always does, the question of how much of who we are is the lineage we were handed, and how much is the lineage we choose, refusing to settle it because the honest answer is that it is always both, braided together, impossible to fully separate. The Stakes miniseries opens, in Season 7, Episode 6, with Marceline making a choice that reveals the deepest fear of a being who has lived 1,000 years. She undergoes a procedure to cure her vampirism, to become mortal, to give up the immortality that has defined her existence. Think about what that means for a character. Marceline has outlived everyone. She watched Simon lose himself across centuries. She will outlive Finn, outlive Bubblegum if Bubblegum is not also functionally ageless, outlive everyone she loves, again and again, forever, and the miniseries reveals that what she fears is not death, but exactly the opposite. She fears the endlessness. She fears being the one who always remains, while everything else is taken. The asymmetric witness condemned to remember 1,000 years of loss, with no end in sight. And the show, through Stakes, refuses to give her a clean escape from that condition. The cure has consequences. Her past, the vampires she once hunted and absorbed, comes back to confront her, and she has to face the accumulated history of who she has been across the centuries. The violence, and the survival, and the loss, all of it returning at once. The show will not let her simply shed her immortality and walk away lighter. It makes her reckon with the full weight of the self she has been, before it lets her decide what self she wants to be next. And the question of whether immortality is a gift or a curse, whether outliving everyone is a blessing or the cruelest possible fate, the show poses and refuses to answer, because the honest answer is that it is both, inseparably. And Marceline has to live inside that contradiction the way Bubblegum lives inside the contradiction of her sovereignty, and Finn lives inside the contradiction of his father. The show does not resolve its people. It deepens them and lets them stay deep. The miniseries comes to its close in The Dark Cloud, Season 7, Episode 13, and the resolution is one of the show's most quietly radical statements about what survival actually requires. The accumulated vampire essence Marceline released takes the form of a dark cloud, a being made of all the death and consumption of her long vampiric past. And defeating it does not mean destroying it cleanly. To end the threat, Marceline takes the vampirism back into herself, reabsorbs the very thing she had paid so dearly to be rid of, becomes the vampire queen again, because the alternative is letting the dark cloud loose on everyone she loves. The cure she fought for is given up willingly, the moment giving it up would cost someone else. And think about what the show is saying through that reversal, because it is the relay of caretakers, expressed at the level of a single soul. Marceline does not get to choose lightness. She chooses instead to carry the heavy thing herself rather than let it fall on anyone else, which is the exact shape of Simon putting on the crown to protect her in the grocery store. The being who was protected by a self-sacrificing guardian becomes, 1,000 years later, a self-sacrificing guardian in her own right, taking the curse back into her own body so that others do not have to face the dark it would become. The show does not frame this as a tragedy, though it is one. It frames it as the thing love does. You take the weight back. You stay the monster, so the people you love do not have to meet one. Marceline ends her own miniseries by inheriting, fully, the gesture that defined the man who raised her, and the show lets that rhyme sit without underlining it, the way it lets all its deepest things sit, trusting you to feel that the orphan from the ruins has become the protector at last. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The journey to that answer begins, in Season 8, with The Invitation, the first part of the Islands mini-series, Episode 20 of the season. A mysterious robotic figure arrives in U, searching for Finn, and a recording surfaces, a message from across the ocean. Evidence that other humans exist somewhere beyond the water Finn has feared his entire life. And here the show does something that pays off a thread it planted in the very first season. The ocean Finn was terrified of in Ocean of Fear, the inherited dread of the water that drowned the old world, is now the only road to the answer he has wanted since the beginning. To find out whether he is alone, Finn has to cross the exact thing his body has always told him to flee. Sit with how patiently the show set that up. The thalassophobia planted in Season 1 as an unexplained quirk becomes, seasons later, the precise obstacle standing between Finn and the truth of his own species. The show does not announce the connection. It does not have a character say that Finn must conquer his old fear to find his people. It simply builds a story in which the boy afraid of the sea must sail across it, and trusts you, who have watched for years, to feel the weight of what that crossing costs him. This is the accumulation the whole series runs on. A detail dropped early, left alone for seasons, suddenly load-bearing. The fear of the ocean was never filler. It was the first move in a story the show would not finish telling for another 6 years. And the crossing of the water is Finn finally walking through the door the apocalypse left in his own nervous system. The miniseries answers the oldest mystery in the show, the one that was there from the very first episode, and that most viewers stopped expecting an answer to. Where are the humans? Finn is described as the last human, a human boy in a world of candy people and vampires and magical creatures, and for years the show let the absence of other humans simply hang there, unexplained. The journey across the ocean finally provides the answer, taking Finn to a hidden community of humans who survived the apocalypse by isolating themselves on islands, cut off from the mutated mainland, living in a controlled and artificial safety. In the 6th part, Min and Marty, Season 8, Episode 25, Finn learns the truth about his own mother and the circumstances that set him adrift as a baby to be found and raised in U. The revelation of Finn's mother in this episode is handled with the show's characteristic refusal of easy sentiment. Finn learns the circumstances of how he came to be adrift, how Martin, his father, was involved in events that separated Finn from his origins as an infant, how the chain of accidents and choices set a human baby loose in a world that would raise him as something other than human. And the show does not give Finn a warm reunion with a loving mother who explains everything and makes the loss make sense. It gives him information, partial and complicated, about people who were flawed and a situation that was nobody's clean fault, and it lets him absorb that the story of his origin is not a fairy tale, but a tangle, the way real origins are. And what is striking about the island's answer is how the show handles the resolution of a long-standing mystery. It does not treat the revelation as a triumphant unveiling. It treats it as a complicated, melancholy homecoming that Finn ultimately chooses to leave. The humans survived, but they survived by retreating from the world, by building a sealed simulation of safety, by refusing the wounded, magical, alive reality of Ooh. And Finn, the last human raised among the Candy people, looks at the preserved humanity of the islands and decides he does not belong to it. He belongs to Ooh, to the broken world, to the scar. The show answers the mystery and then has its hero reject the answer. The humans are not the home. The wounded world is the home. Even when the show closes a question, it closes it in a way that points back toward its central love of the imperfect, the mutated, the alive. The later seasons also tell one last great story about Finn himself, about identity and doubles, and the question of who a person is when a part of them is given its own life. And it begins, fittingly, with a sword. For most of the series, Finn carried a grass sword, an object that had bonded to his arm, and in Reboot, Season 8, Episode 13, the consequences of that bond come due. The grass sword has been quietly alive, quietly accumulating something, and out of it, out of a copy of Finn made from the sword and the memory of Finn it absorbed, a new being is born. A grass creature that looks like Finn and carries pieces of Finn and is not Finn. The show, having spent a season answering where Finn came from, immediately complicates the answer by producing a version of him that grew out of his own weapon. That being is named Fern, and his story, which unfolds across Two Swords, Season 8, Episode 14, and the episodes that follow, is one of the most quietly tragic the show ever told, because Fern is a person made of Finn who can never be Finn. He has Finn's memories, Finn's face, Finn's longing to be a hero, and none of Finn's claim to actually being the original. He is a copy who knows he is a copy, a being who wakes into existence already in the shadow of someone he can never be, and the show treats his predicament with enormous seriousness. Fern does not get to be the boy he remembers being. He gets to be the leftover, the double, the one who has to watch the real Finn live the life Fern feels in his own borrowed memories as his own. In Do No Harm, Season 8, Episode 15, the conflict between them comes to a head, and the show makes a precise and painful choice about it. Fern, unable to bear the existence of a Finn who invalidates his own selfhood simply by existing, turns on Finn, tries to replace him, tries to become the only Finn by removing the original. And the tragedy is that Fern is not evil. He is the lemongrab problem again, the Goliad problem again. He is a being made imperfectly and then left to carry the impossibility of his own existence alone. Nobody made Fern to be a villain. He becomes one the way everyone in this show becomes one, by being a damaged creation nobody quite knew how to take care of, by inheriting a wound and having no one to absorb it for him. And the show, across the rest of Fern's arc, does something that distinguishes it from almost every other story about a hero and his evil double. It refuses to let Fern be disposable. It does not allow Finn to simply defeat his copy and move on. It insists that Fern is a person, that his suffering is real, that the question of what Finn owes to a being made out of his own self is a genuine moral question, and not an action movie obstacle. Fern is the part of Finn that did not get to be loved enough, given a body, and set loose. And the show treats the eventual resolution of his story as a grief, rather than a victory. Finn does not triumph over Fern. Finn loses Fern, the way you lose a brother, the way you lose a part of yourself you might have been kinder to. The double is not vanquished. The double is mourned. The end of Fern's story, which arrives in 3 buckets, Season 9, Episode 14, is the show keeping faith with everything it had built around him. When Fern finally falls, it is not as a monster defeated, but as a wounded being released, and Finn carries the loss as exactly that, a loss. Something that grew out of him and suffered, and is now gone. The show does not give Finn a clean win, or a clear lesson. It gives him another grief to carry alongside the father and the arm and all the rest, another piece of evidence that being a hero in this world is mostly the accumulation of things you could not save. And it leaves open, the way it leaves everything open, the question of whether Fern could have been saved if anyone had understood sooner what he was. A being made of need and abandoned to it. A copy who only ever wanted to be loved as an original. The wound that made Fern is never fully closed. It is only, finally mourned. The final season also reaches back, one last time, to fill in the origin of its most complicated figure, and it does so in a way that recontextualizes everything about her sovereignty. The episode is Bonobo Bubblegum, Season 10, Episode 4. It tells the story of how the Candy Kingdom began, how a young bubblegum, made of gum and given consciousness, built her people one by one out of biomass and her own substance, how she became a ruler not by inheritance or conquest, but by literal creation. And it introduces the family that the Gum War will eventually involve. The relatives she made and lost, including Gumbald, who became an enemy. What this origin reveals is that Bubblegum has been alone in a very specific way for her entire existence. She did not inherit a kingdom. She made one, because she needed one, because consciousness in an empty post-apocalyptic world is unbearable alone, and the only way to have a people was to build them. Every candy person is, in a sense, an answer to her loneliness, a companion she manufactured because the world had not provided her any. And that reframes her control of them, her surveillance, her manipulation into something more tragic and more understandable than simple tyranny. She cannot quite see them as separate from her, because they are, in the most literal sense, extensions of her, made from her. To keep her company in a world that ended before she woke up in it. The show lets this complicate her without excusing her. It does not tell you whether a creator has the right to rule her creations. It shows you why she believes she does, and lets the ethical question stay open, the way it has kept every other deep question open. Bubblegum is not resolved into hero or villain. She is left exactly as complicated as a person who built her own family out of her own body would have to be. The final stretch of the series before the finale gathers its threads, and it begins with a transformation of the whole world. In Skyhooks, the first part of the Elements miniseries, Season 9, Episode 2, Finn and Jake return from the islands to find Ooh unrecognizable, broken apart into elemental kingdoms by a wave of magic that has reshaped reality and rewritten the people they know. The candy people have been remade into pure candy, the ice into pure ice, and the characters Finn loves have been transformed into exaggerated, elemental versions of their essential natures, their personalities distilled down to a single dominant trait and amplified until it consumes them. And the Elements miniseries is the show performing one last act of analysis on its own characters. In the open, by literally reducing each of them to their core element and asking what is left. Strip Bubblegum down to her essence and you get pure candy, sweetness weaponized into control. Strip the Ice Kingdom down and you get cold isolation. The miniseries is a thought experiment about identity, about whether a person is the sum of their contradictions or the single thing underneath them. And the show's answer, characteristically, is that the reduction is a kind of damage. A being made of only one element is a being that has lost the tension that made them a person. Bubblegum is interesting because her care and her control are in conflict. Reduce her to pure sweetness and the conflict is gone. And so is she. The show spends a whole miniseries demonstrating that its people are made of their contradictions, that the unresolved tensions are not flaws to be purified away, but the very substance of who they are, which is the same thing the show has been saying about its mysteries all along. The open question is not a defect. It is the thing that keeps the character and the world alive. As the series enters its final season, it returns one last time to the question of who Finn is, and it does so by bringing back the ghost of the double he lost. In 17, Season 10, Episode 5, a celebration of Finn's birthday is interrupted by a figure who appears to be Fern, returned, and the episode plays with Finn's grief and guilt over the grass creature made from his own self, the brother double he could not save. The episode turns on questions of identity and deception, on who is real and who is a copy, on the lingering wound of Fern that Finn carries into his last year of the show. It is the show refusing, even at the end, to let the cost of Fern simply fade, insisting that the people you fail to save stay with you, shaping who you become. And this is the show, in its final season, gathering Finn's whole journey into the single question it has been asking about him since City of Thieves, when his goodness was effortless and untested. Who is Finn, after all of it? After the father who did not want him, the arm he lost and grew back, the double he could not save, the humanity he found and rejected, the 1,000 small adventures, and the handful of enormous griefs. The show does not answer with a definition. It answers with accumulation, with the fact that Finn at 17 is the sum of everyone he loved and lost and tried to take care of. That his identity is not a fixed thing he discovered, but a thing he built, choice by choice, out of the damage and the love. The boy who would not steal has become a young man who has lost almost everything and chosen, each time, to keep caring anyway. That is not a personality. That is a practice. And the show leaves the question of who Finn finally is exactly as open as it leaves everything else. Because a person, like a world, is never finished, only ongoing. With those threads gathered, the relationships deepened, the mysteries left in their careful state of openness, the show arrives at its ending. By the close of the Elements miniseries, its central figures have been broken down to their cores and put back together, examined one last time for what they are made of at the bottom. And then the thing the show had been building toward for 8 years comes into view, the finale. But just before the very end, the show sets its final conflict in motion, and it is worth pausing on, because of how ordinary it is compared to the cosmic stakes that came before. The episode is GOLB, Season 10, Episode 12. The conflict that drives the finale is not, at first, the Lich or GOLB or the end of all existence. It is a war between Princess Bubblegum and her uncle Gumbald, a candy person she created and who turned against her. A family dispute scaled up into a kingdom-threatening conflict. The Gum War. The show, having spent years on cosmic threats, chooses to begin its finale with something small and human and sad. A family that cannot stop hurting each other. A maker at war with the things she made. And that choice tells you what the show believes the real stakes always were. Not the end of the universe, but the question of whether the people of Ooo can stop wounding one another long enough to survive. The Gum War is the apocalypse in miniature. A society tearing itself apart over old grievances. And it is the show insisting, one last time, that the true danger in this world was never the cosmic horror, but the ordinary failure of beings to take care of each other. The finale will bring back the cosmic horror, will summon a threat the size of reality itself. But it begins with a family argument, because the family argument is, to this show, the thing the cosmic horror was always a metaphor for. The wound is interpersonal before it is cosmic. The apocalypse, remember, was a war. And a war is just the largest possible version of people failing to take care of each other. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And so we reach the end. The episode is Come Along With Me, Season 10, Episode 13. It aired on the 3rd of September 2018. It is the series finale, a 44-minute extended episode that had to close 8 years and hundreds of episodes of story at once, and it is, fittingly, for everything we have discussed. An ending that resolves the emotional threads while leaving the cosmic mysteries exactly as open as they always were. The official title is Come Along With Me, and although Cartoon Network promoted it under another name and some databases split its runtime into multiple episode numbers, it is a single ending, and it should be understood as one. The finale is framed, and this is crucial to everything we have said, as a story being told. It opens not in the present of Ooo, but 1,000 years in the future, with two characters we have never met, a being named Shermie and a Jake-like figure named Beth, living in a far future Ooo, telling each other the legend of Finn and Jake and the Great War that nearly ended their world. The entire finale, in other words, is presented as a tale recounted long after the fact, a story passed down across 1,000 years, its details shaped by the telling, and the connective tissue of that telling, the thread that carries us through the saga, is a song. Mo is part of the framing. The story reaches us filtered through memory and legend and the loving, fantasy-prone sensibility of the show itself. Stop and feel the weight of that structure, because it is the show's final and most generous gesture toward everything we have been tracing. By framing the finale as a legend told 1,000 years later, the show builds the unreliability into the ending itself. It tells you, in its last hour, that what you are watching is a story, retold across centuries, and that stories change in the telling. This is the BMO theory, and the coma theory, and the entire breathing room of the series, elevated into the very architecture of the conclusion. The show does not end by telling you what really happened. It ends by reminding you that all of this always was a story, and that a story is a thing that lives by being retold, slightly differently, by each person who carries it forward. The finale predicts its own imperfect remembering. It hands the saga to the future, and trusts the future to keep it alive by getting it a little wrong. Inside that frame, the story comes to its climax. The Gum War erupts, and into the chaos of that ordinary terrible conflict, something far larger is summoned. GOLB. GOLB is the show's final and greatest mystery. A cosmic entity, a being of pure chaos, the antithesis of order and creation and form. GOLB arrives and begins to unmake the world, and the threat is no longer one kingdom or one family, but the dissolution of reality into meaningless noise. And here is the thing I have to be precise about, because it is the purest example of this entire essay's argument. The show never explains what GOLB is. It never explains where GOLB came from, or what GOLB wants, or what GOLB means. GOLB is glimpsed earlier in the series, including in the dreamlike textures the show loved, and GOLB arrives at the end as the final antagonist, and across all of it, the nature of GOLB remains deliberately, completely unexplained. GOLB is canon. GOLB exists within the story, unambiguously, as a real cosmic entity. That is not in question. What is left open, permanently and on purpose, is what GOLB is. The show had every opportunity, in a 44-minute finale, to deliver an origin, an explanation, a lore dump that would close the book on its greatest mystery. It chose not to. It let GOLB remain pure chaos, pure unexplained antagonism, a force whose entire meaning is that it cannot be given a meaning. And this is not the show running out of time or forgetting to explain. This is the show making its thesis into a monster. GOLB is the breathing room given the form of a god. GOLB is everything the show refused to close, gathered into a single being, and placed at the climax of the entire saga, so that the final confrontation is not against a villain you understand, but against the unknown itself. Consider how rare that choice is, and how much discipline it took. A finale is the moment every long-running show feels the pressure to explain itself, to reward the patient viewer with answers, to deliver the lore that fans spent years assembling. Adventure Time had a multiverse, a cosmic structure, a wishmaster, a reincarnating embodiment of death, and at the top of it all, a being of pure chaos, glimpsed since the dreamlike middle seasons. The finale could have explained where GOLB came from, what GOLB wanted, how GOLB related to the Lich and Prismo and the Comet and the Crown. It would have been easy, and it would have satisfied a certain hunger, and the show chose deliberately, in its final hour, to explain none of it. It looked at the single largest question it had ever raised, and decided that the most honest thing it could do was leave it exactly as open as it had always been. That is not a show that ran out of answers. That is a show that understood something about answers. An explained GOLB would be a smaller GOLB. The moment you give chaos an origin, a motive, a place in the cosmology, you domesticate it. You fold it into the order it was supposed to oppose. And it stops being chaos and becomes just another monster with a backstory. The only way to keep GOLB meaning what it means, the unknown, the formless, the thing that cannot be made sense of, is to never make sense of it. The show protected its greatest mystery by refusing to solve it, and in doing so, it made GOLB into the perfect emblem of everything we have been tracing. Every open question from the Crown to the coma reading, all of them gathered and given a single face at the end. GOLB is not a gap in the story. GOLB is the story admitting, out loud at the climax, that some things are meant to stay unexplained, and that the meaning is in the staying. And think about how the heroes defeat it, because the method is the show's final answer to everything. They do not defeat GOLB with a bigger weapon. They do not solve the mystery of GOLB or explain it into submission. They sing. The characters of Ooh, facing a being of pure chaos that is unmaking their world, respond with a song, Mo's song, Time Adventure, a song Rebecca Sugar returned to the show specifically to write for the finale, years after she had left to make her own series. The song spreads from character to character, a melody about how the moment will happen, has happened, and is happening still, about being together through time, and the collective act of singing it, the refusal of these connected beings to face the dark alone, is what holds GOLB at bay. The answer to chaos is not order imposed. It is connection sung. It is the grocery store again. It is Simon singing to Marceline to hold back the dark, scaled up to the entire world singing to hold back the end of everything. Sit with how complete that rhyme is. The series began, in its deepest flashback, with a man singing a song to a frightened child to keep the darkness away for one more night. The series ends with an entire world singing a song to keep the ultimate darkness away. The same gesture. The same faith that a voice raised in connection can hold back the void. Between those two songs lies the entire story of Ooh, 1,000 years of people taking care of each other in a wounded world, and the finale gathers all of it into a single act of communal singing against chaos. The show did not need to explain GOLB, because the show never believed the answer to chaos was explanation. The answer was always connection. And connection does not require an explanation. It requires only that you do not let the other person face the dark alone. Let me stay with the song a little longer, because the song is the show's final argument and it deserves the patience. Time Adventure is built around a simple, almost unbearable idea, sung in plain language. The idea is that this moment, the one happening right now, will not be lost. It happened. It is happening. It will always have happened. The lyric insists that even after everything ends, even after the people are gone, and the world has changed beyond recognition, the moment of being together remains true, fixed, eternal, because it was real once, and reality cannot be taken back. For a show that began in the ruins of a world that ended, that buried an apocalypse under its candy surface, that watched a man lose every memory he had, this is the most direct comfort it ever offered. Things end. People forget. Worlds fall. And still, the moment that was true stays true forever, because it was. Everything stays. The song Marceline's mother sang, and the song that defeats GOLB are, underneath, the same song, making the same impossible promise against the same darkness. There is a production fact woven into this that makes the song land even heavier once you know it. Time Adventure was written by Rebecca Sugar, who had left Adventure Time years earlier, after storyboarding Simon and Marcy, to create her own series. She came back, specifically to write the song that ends the show. Sit with the shape of that. The person who storyboarded the grocery store, the deepest flashback, the scene of a man singing to a child to hold back the dark, is the same person who returned at the very end to write the song an entire world sings, to hold back the end of everything. The first song and the last song come, in a real sense, from the same hand. The bookends of the entire series, the small private song in the ruins and the vast communal song Against Chaos, were authored by the same artist, years apart, framing everything in between. The show did not just rhyme its beginning and its ending thematically. It rhymed them in who made them. And watch how the song moves through the finale, because the movement is the meaning. It does not arrive as a triumphant anthem belted by a hero. It begins small, with Bimo, the least powerful and least reliable and most loving member of the whole cast, kicking out a simple melody on a simple instrument. And then it spreads. One voice becomes two. Two become a handful. The melody passes from character to character, from Finn to Jake to Bubblegum to Marceline to the Candy People, each one taking it up and adding to it, until the thing that started as one small console singing alone in the dark has become the collective voice of an entire world. The song is not imposed from above. It grows from the bottom, from the smallest and the gentlest, outward, the way Care has always moved in this show, the way Simon's love moved to Marceline and Marceline's to others, passed hand to hand until it covers everything. The defeat of GOLB is the relay of caretakers turned into music. Every voice that ever agreed to keep watch, joining the same melody at once. And the way the song works inside the finale matters. It is not a weapon. It does not blast GOLB, or bind it, or destroy it. The characters sing, and the singing creates a kind of harmony, an order, that a being of pure chaos cannot exist within, and GOLB is, in a sense, harmonized away, returned to wherever chaos goes, when enough connected beings refuse to let it have the last word. The defeat of the show's greatest mystery is not the solving of the mystery. GOLB is never explained. GOLB is simply outsung. The unknown is not conquered by knowledge. It is held at bay by connection. And that is the show telling you, in its final minutes, that you were never meant to understand GOLB. That understanding was never the point. That the point was always whether the frightened, separate beings of a broken world would choose to face the dark together rather than alone. They choose together. The mystery stays a mystery. The connection is the victory. The two facts are inseparable, and the show wants them to be. In the aftermath, the finale resolves the emotional threads with a tenderness that the cosmic mysteries never received. Princess Bubblegum and Marceline, after seasons of charged history left deliberately open, share a kiss, and the relationship the show had implied for years becomes explicit at last, landing with all the weight of everything that had gone unspoken. Simon, in the chaos of GOLB, is briefly restored, the crown's curse momentarily undone, and though the resolution of his story is bittersweet and complicated, the show grants him a measure of grace. The Gum War ends not in conquest, but in exhausted reconciliation, and Finn, who has grown across the entire series from a small boy into a young man, steps into a future where he is no longer the last human, and no longer the only hero where the watch can be handed on. The kiss between Bubblegum and Marceline deserves its own moment of attention because of how the show chose to place it. It does not happen in a quiet, private scene built to spotlight it. It happens in the middle of the war, in a moment of danger, when Marceline is hurt and the two of them are suddenly, briefly, certain they might lose each other. The relationship the show had implied for years, that it had compressed into a stuffed bear handed back in Skywitch, that it had let hum under the surface of what was missing, becomes explicit at exactly the moment when the cost of leaving it unspoken becomes unbearable. The years of withholding do not get a tidy reveal. They get a kiss in a crisis, the thing finally said because the alternative is never saying it. And that placement is the show keeping faith with everything it believed about its open spaces. The thing held open for years lands hardest not when it is explained, but when it is finally, urgently chosen, in the dark, against the possibility of loss. And the resolution of the gum war itself is the show's last quiet argument about what actually ends conflicts. Bubblegum and Gumbald, the maker and the relative she made and lost, do not resolve their war through a decisive victory or a grand speech of forgiveness. The conflict ends in exhaustion, in the larger horror of GOLB making the family dispute suddenly small, in the survivors looking at what they nearly destroyed and choosing, wearily, to stop. The show refuses to give the gum war a clean moral resolution, because clean moral resolutions are not how this show believes wounds actually close. They close the way the apocalypse closed, by people simply being too tired of destruction to continue it, by the next thing to live for becoming more urgent than the old thing to fight about. The reconciliation is not triumphant. It is exhausted, and partial, and good enough, which is the most honest kind of peace the show knows how to offer. The restoration of Simon, in particular, carries the weight of everything the series began with, and the show handles it with exactly the bittersweetness the Crown's tragedy demanded. In the chaos surrounding GOLB, the Crown's hold on Simon is broken, and for a moment, the man from the grocery store is returned to himself. Lucid, whole. Simon Petrikov again after 1,000 years of being the Ice King. And the show does not turn this into an unqualified triumph. Simon comes back to a world that moved on without him, to a Marceline who is no longer the child he protected, to a life he has to figure out how to live, now that the curse that defined him is gone. The restoration is grace, but it is complicated grace, the kind that comes with its own grief, because being returned to yourself after 1,000 years lost is not the same as never having been lost. The show gives Simon his ending and refuses to make it simple, because nothing the Crown touched was ever going to be simple again. And even here it leaves the long aftermath of his story open, a man at the start of a second life he does not yet know how to live. And then the finale does its final characteristic thing. It pulls back to the framing story, 1,000 years later, to Shermie and Beth, the new pair living in a new ooh, and it reveals that they are, in their own way, the inheritors of Finn and Jake, the next turn of the cycle, the new caretakers of a world that keeps going. The story ends by beginning again. The cycle of guardianship, of one era handing the watch to the next, completes one full revolution and starts another. Ooh continues, 1,000 years on, because someone always agrees to keep watch, and because the story keeps being told. The last image is not a conclusion. It is a continuation. The world goes on, changed and the same, exactly as the song promised. Everything stays. There is one more thing the finale does with its 1,000 years later frame that deserves to be sat with, because it closes the loop the show opened with the Mushroom War. At the very beginning of our journey, we said that Ooh is post-apocalyptic Earth, a world 1,000 years after a catastrophe, and that the children of that world grow up without carrying the knowledge of what the ruins are. The finale ends 1,000 years after Finn and Jake, with Shermie and Beth living in a new Ooh, telling the legend of the heroes who came before, and they too do not fully know the world they have inherited. They have a story, half-remembered, passed down, getting a little wrong with each retelling. They are exactly where Finn was, standing on the ruins of a previous age, not knowing the full truth of what came before them, building their lives on top of a history they can only partly see. And that symmetry is the show's final, quiet statement about itself. Every generation in Ooh lives on the unexplained ruins of the one before. The humans built on an Earth they did not fully understand, and the bombs fell. Finn built on the ruins of the humans, not knowing what the Bitten Mountain was. Shermie and Beth build on the ruins of Finn's age, knowing him only as a legend. The not knowing is generational, It is the condition of living in time. You always inherit a world whose full story you can never recover, and you always pass on a world whose full story the next generation will never recover either. The open questions are not a quirk of one show. They are the show's honest portrait of how history actually works, of how every era is a half-remembered legend to the one that follows. And the comfort the show offers is not that you will someday understand. The comfort is that the story keeps being told anyway, lovingly, imperfectly, by people who agree to carry it forward, even though they will never have all of it. That is enough. The show says that is enough. Now think back to where we started, to the man in the blue robe, singing in the ruined grocery store, and feel how much that scene has changed without changing at all. When we began, it was a flashback, a sad piece of backstory, a man losing his mind to protect a child. Now you know that it was the seed of the entire show. The song he sang to hold back the dark is the same song, in spirit, that the whole world sings at the end to hold back GOLB. The crown that erased him is the first of the show's great unexplained mysteries. The same kind of mystery as the Lich's cycle, and the coma reading, and Mo's reliability, and GOLB itself. And the love that drove him to sacrifice his own mind is the love that runs through every era of Ooh, era handing the watch to era, 1,000 years before the grocery store, and 1,000 years after the finale. The scene did not change. You changed. The show grew it, in your understanding, by leaving everything around it open long enough for the meaning to fill in. That is the entire story of Adventure Time, and that is what the theories are. They are not the parts the show failed to finish. They are the parts the show left breathing. Ooh is post-apocalyptic Earth, and that is confirmed, and the show keeps it mostly buried so the world can stay wondrous. The Lich becomes Sweet Pea, and that is confirmed, and the show lets the meaning of that transformation stay open. GOLB is real, and GOLB is never explained, on purpose, because the show believes the unexplained is more alive than the explained. The coma reading and the unreliable narrator are fan theories the show never confirmed and never denied, and the show built exactly the kind of dream-permeable, story-framed world in which such readings could grow and never be disproven. None of these are mistakes. All of them are the breathing room. The show grew across 8 years by refusing to close its biggest questions. And that refusal is why the world still feels bottomless, why you can return to it again and again and find it deeper than you left it. Consider what it means that you can watch this entire story, 1,000 years of it, from the bombs to the singing at the end of the world, and arrive at the close knowing exactly what happened and still not knowing what most of it was. You know the crown erased Simon, and you do not know what the crown is. You know the Lich became Sweet Pea, and you do not know whether the loop of death is broken or simply turning. You know GOLB arrived and was outsung, and you do not know what GOLB is, and you never will, because the show decided you should not. You know Finn lived a lifetime in a pillow world, and you do not know if it was real. You know BMO told you the story, and you do not know how much of it to believe, and none of that not knowing diminishes the story. All of it enlarges the story. The things you do not know are the rooms in the house you have not opened yet, and they are the reason the house feels infinite, even after you have lived in it for years. That is the gift the show was building the whole time, beat by beat, mystery by mystery, from the first candy zombie to the last note of time adventure. It built a world you cannot exhaust. It made sure that no matter how many times you return, there will be a question waiting, open, unanswered, alive, and it did this not by being careless or unfinished, but by being more disciplined than almost any show of its kind, by holding its nerve at every moment it could have explained, by trusting that the wonder of the unexplained was worth more than the satisfaction of the answer. The theories are the proof of that discipline. They are the audience finding the rooms the show left open and moving in, furnishing them with readings the show never confirmed and never denied, keeping the world alive by continuing to wonder about it. The fandom did not impose mysteries on Adventure Time. Adventure Time invited them, and then it left the door open, and then it walked away, smiling, knowing you would keep wondering long after the screen went dark. A story that explained everything would be a story you could finish. Adventure Time made itself unfinishable on purpose. It gave you a world with a flaw you can never quite see the bottom of, a past that goes back 1,000 years, and a future that goes forward 1,000 more, mysteries that were never meant to close, and a single, simple act repeated from the first flashback to the final scene. Someone singing to someone else, in the dark, so that neither of them has to be alone in it. The theories are the breathing room. The mysteries are the part of the story that is still alive. And the song, the same song, sung in a grocery store at the end of the world, and sung again by an entire world at the end of the show, is the answer the show offered to every open question it ever left. Come along with me. The dark is large, and the answers are few, and the only thing that has ever held it back is the willingness to face it together. So when you return to Oo, and you will return to Oo, because it is the kind of world you come home to, do not go looking for the answers the show withheld. Go looking for the questions it left open, and sit inside them the way you sit in a familiar room, and let them stay exactly as unresolved as they were always meant to be. The man is still singing in the grocery store. The world is still singing at the end. And somewhere 1,000 years on, two new figures are telling the story again, getting it a little wrong, keeping it alive. That is not a story that ended. That is a story that is still being told. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.